At Christmas dinner, my wife's mother gave everyone gifts. I got nothing. She said, "Be grateful you can sit here." My wife's sister chuckled and said, "Be glad we still remember your name." Everyone laughed. I said, "Good to know." 2 weeks later, they were at my door, screaming, "We need to talk. Open up, please." The snow had started falling 3 hours before dinner. Not the picturesque kind you see in movies, those fat, lazy flakes that drift down like feathers and make children squeal. This was the angry snow of late December, small and sharp, pelting against the windows of my mother-in-law's house like 1,000 tiny accusations. I watched it while standing in the driveway, my hands wrapped around the handles of shopping bags containing gifts I'd spent weeks selecting. Thoughtful gifts, expensive gifts. Gifts that said, "I see you, I know you, I care." My wife Sarah brushed past me, her arms laden with casserole dishes. "Are you coming?" she asked, not unkindly, but with that edge of impatience that had been growing sharper over the past year. Mom's already texted twice. I should have known then. Should have read the signs written in the December air, in the way Sarah hadn't looked at me properly in weeks, in the subtle shift of her body away from mine whenever I entered a room. But we ignore what we don't want to see, don't we? We tell ourselves stories. She's stressed. It's the holidays. Things will get better after the new year. We become archaeologists of our own denial, carefully brushing away the dirt to preserve the bones of something already dead. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine when we entered. Martha, my mother-in-law, though she'd asked me years ago to call her by her first name in that way that feels generous but is actually a withholding, a refusal of the intimacy that Mom would imply, stood in the foyer wearing a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my car payment. She embraced Sarah with the fervor of someone reuniting after years of separation rather than the 2 weeks it had actually been since their last lunch together. "Darling," she cooed, holding Sarah's face between her hands like she was appraising a precious artifact. "You look thin. Are you eating?" Sarah laughed, that bright, brittle sound she made around her family. "Mom, I'm fine. We brought the green bean casserole you asked for." "Wonderful, wonderful." Martha's eyes slid to me then, and I watched something happen in them, a shuddering, a closing of doors. "And you're here too. Not hello, not Merry Christmas, not even my name. Just an acknowledgement of my physical presence, the way you might note the existence of furniture that's always been there but holds no particular value." I held up the shopping bags. "Merry Christmas, Martha. Shall I put these under the tree?" "If you must." She'd already turned away, leading Sarah deeper into the house, their voices blending into that exclusive frequency of mother-daughter communion from which I had always been barred. The living room was a magazine spread come to life. A 12-foot tree dominated one corner, decorated with what I knew were heirloom ornaments, each one carrying a story I wasn't part of. The furniture had been rearranged to accommodate the crowd, Sarah's father Thomas in his leather armchair by the fireplace, her sister Jennifer on the sofa with her husband Marcus, their 2 children tearing through wrapped presents they'd apparently been allowed to open early. Sarah's brother Daniel stood by the bar cart, already working on what I suspected wasn't his first scotch of the afternoon. "Look who finally showed up," Jennifer called out, her voice carrying that particular tone she'd perfected humor, masking hostility, a smile with teeth. "We were starting to think you'd gotten lost on the way from the car." Marcus chuckled, not looking up from his phone. The children ignored me entirely, which somehow felt the most honest response in the room. I set the shopping bags down carefully, arranging the gifts under the tree with the precision of someone trying to prove they belong. I'd wrapped them myself, not the professional job Jennifer's presents displayed, with their perfect corners and elaborate bows, but neat enough, respectable. Each one labeled in my careful handwriting, for Martha, for Thomas, for Jennifer, and so on. "Can I get you something to drink?" Thomas asked from his armchair, his voice carrying the false heartiness of a man performing hospitality. He was a large man, made larger by success and the confidence it brings. A real estate developer who spoke in square footage and property values, who measured worth in assets and returns on investment. I had the persistent feeling he'd appraised me years ago and found the numbers wanting. Just water, thanks. Water. Daniel laughed from the bar cart. It's Christmas, man. Live a little. I'm trying to live in this room where the air feels thick with something I can't name, where every laugh seems to be at my expense, where my own wife stands closer to her mother than to me. But I said, designated driver, and accepted the glass of water Thomas handed me, our fingers not quite touching in the exchange. Dinner was announced with a bell, an actual silver bell that Martha rang while standing at the threshold of the dining room, as if we were guests at a country estate rather than family gathering for Christmas. The table was set with china. I knew Sarah coveted the pattern her grandmother had collected, each piece irreplaceable, each one destined to pass to Sarah and Jennifer someday. I'd offered once to start our own collection, something we could build together, but Sarah had looked at me with such withering pity that I'd never mentioned it again. We took our seats with the choreography of long-established hierarchy. Thomas at the head, Martha at the foot, Jennifer and Marcus on one side with their children relegated to a folding table in the corner, Daniel across from them, and Sarah and I, Sarah next to her mother, me beside her, at the edge of the table in a chair that seemed slightly smaller than the others, though I knew that was just my perception, my growing sense of taking up space I hadn't earned. The meal was elaborate. A turkey that Martha had brined for 3 days, sides that each told a story, the stuffing from her mother's recipe, the cranberry sauce from that little shop in Vermont they visited every fall, the potatoes mashed with cream that cost more per pint than I spent on lunch in a week. I complimented everything, thanked Martha for her work, tried to participate in conversations that seemed to curve around me like water around a stone. So, Jennifer said, skewering a Brussels sprout with surgical precision, how's the job hunt going? I felt Sarah tense beside me. This was new territory, dangerous ground. I'd been laid off 4 months ago. A corporate restructuring, they'd called it, though the real story was more complicated. Budget cuts and performance reviews, and the slow realization that I'd never been quite good enough at the professional performance required to succeed in that world. I'd been freelancing since then, picking up contracts, trying to build something sustainable. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't stable. But it was honest work, and I was good at it. It's going well, actually, I said, keeping my voice even. I've got 3 projects lined up for January, and I'm in talks with freelancing, Jennifer interrupted, loading the word with disdain. That's what we're calling unemployment now? Jennifer, Sarah said softly, but there was no real rebuke in it, just a token protest, the kind you make to maintain appearances while secretly agreeing with the sentiment. I'm just saying. Jennifer took a sip of her wine, her 3rd glass by my count. At some point, you have to think about stability, real jobs, benefits, the future. Her eyes slid to Sarah with meaning so heavy it practically bent the light, especially if you're thinking about a family. The silence that followed had weight, physical, oppressive weight. I watched Sarah's hand tighten around her fork, saw the muscle in her jaw flex. We'd talked about children once, early on, when everything was still possibility and potential. But lately, whenever the subject arose, she'd change it quickly, the way you might redirect a conversation away from someone's terminal diagnosis. We're not talking about this now, Sarah said, and I loved her for it and resented her for needing to say it at all. Martha cleared her throat, that delicate sound that somehow commanded absolute attention. Shall we clear for dessert? The reset was grateful. We moved in coordinated chaos, stacking plates, ferrying dishes to the kitchen. I carried what I could, trying to be useful, but found myself repeatedly cut off by Jennifer or Daniel, who seemed to have a practice dance of kitchen choreography from which I was excluded. I ended up standing by the sink, holding a gravy boat with nowhere to put it, until Martha gently took it from my hands. Why don't you wait in the living room? She suggested, and it wasn't a suggestion. So I sat on the sofa, watching the fire burn down to embers, listening to the sounds of family in the other room, laughter and the clink of silverware. Sarah's voice bright with animation in a way it never was when we were alone anymore. The children ran through periodically, chasing each other in some elaborate game whose rules I couldn't decipher. Once, the youngest, Sophie, 5 years old, all curls and enormous eyes, stopped in front of me. "Are you Sarah's husband?" she asked, with the blunt curiosity of children who haven't yet learned that some questions are knives. "I am." She studied me for a moment, tilting her head. "You're not in any of the pictures." I looked around the room and realized she was right. The walls were covered with family photos, graduations and weddings, holidays and achievements, and I appeared in none of them. Even the wedding photo on the mantel, mine and Sarah's, had been carefully positioned to show mostly Sarah, her white dress and radiant smile, with just the edge of my shoulder visible in the frame. "That's okay," I told Sophie, though something in my chest was cracking. "I'm here now." She considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher contemplating existence. "Okay," she finally said, and ran off to resume her game. "Presents!" Martha's voice called from the dining room, and everyone reconvened in the living room with dessert plates balanced on laps, pumpkin pie and apple tart, whipped cream and coffee in delicate cups. I'd been to enough of these gatherings to know the ritual. Martha distributed gifts with ceremony, reading each tag aloud, making a production of the giving. She started with the children, who tore through wrapping paper with gleeful destruction. Then Thomas, who received expensive Scotch and first edition books. Daniel got tech gadgets and designer clothes. Jennifer received jewelry that made her squeal with delight. Then Sarah, box after box, each one opened with reverent care. A cashmere scarf, a handbag I recognized from a magazine ad, gift cards to restaurants and spas. And finally, the big one, a long, flat box that contained a vintage dress Martha had apparently been hunting for years, something Sarah had mentioned wanting once in passing. The kind of attention, the kind of listening, that made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. "Mom," she breathed, "it's perfect. Only the best for my daughter." I Maddox better. The pile of opened gifts grew. Marcus received golf clubs. Daniel's girlfriend, a woman I'd met once and whose name I'd already forgotten, got perfume and chocolates. Even the children's nanny, who'd appeared briefly to collect the kids for bedtime, received a generous bonus in a card. And then the giving stopped. I sat there, my dessert plate balanced on my knee, watching everyone admire their hauls, compare their gifts, exclaim over Martha's generosity and thoughtfulness. I waited for my name to be called. Looked under the tree for a box I might have missed, wondered if perhaps my gift had been set aside, something special saved for last. But the tree was empty now, except for the gifts I'd brought, still unopened. Sarah was holding up her dress, showing it to Jennifer, not looking at me, not acknowledging what was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone in the room. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. Well, that was quite a haul. He was looking at me with something like pity, which somehow made it worse. I set down my plate carefully, stood up with the deliberateness of someone testing whether their legs would hold. "Thank you for dinner, Martha," I said, and my voice came out steady, which felt like a victory. It was wonderful. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw it clearly for the first time, the calculation in her eyes, the intentionality of this exclusion. This wasn't oversight. This was a message being delivered, clear as any words could be. "Be grateful you can sit here," she said, and her voice was pleasant, conversational, as if she were discussing the weather or the quality of the turkey. The room went quiet. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. Jennifer laughed. First, a sharp, bright sound, like glass breaking. "Be glad we still remember your name." And then they all laughed. Not cruel laughter, exactly. Not mean-spirited in the way you'd expect from villains in a story, but laughter of complicity, of shared understanding, of being in on a joke that had me as its punchline. Daniel's low chuckle. Marcus's uncomfortable titter. Thomas's rumbling mirth. Even Sarah, my wife, my partner, the person who'd promised to stand beside me through everything, pressed her lips together to suppress a smile. I stood there in the firelight, in the expensive living room with its perfect tree and its family that would never be mine, and felt something shift inside me. Not break, that would come later, but shift, like tectonic plates moving, creating the conditions for an earthquake that would reshape the entire landscape. Good to know, I said. 2 words, quiet, calm, unremarkable. But I said them to myself as much as to them. Good to know where I stood. Good to know what I was worth in their eyes. Good to know that all my efforts at belonging, at proving myself worthy of this family, at being enough for Sarah, had been observed and measured and found fundamentally insufficient. I collected my coat from the closet while they resumed their conversations, already moving past the moment, already forgetting me. Sarah followed me to the door, her face unreadable. "I'll be out in a bit," she said. "I want to help Mom clean up." "Of course. Don't be upset. It's not they didn't mean. It's fine, Sarah. You're being dramatic." "Am I?" I looked at her. This woman I'd loved. This woman I'd built my life around. You tell me, am I being dramatic, or am I finally seeing clearly? She flinched at that, and I felt a small, bitter satisfaction. "I'll see you at home," she said, and closed the door between us. I stood in the driveway as the angry snow fell, feeling it sting my face, and I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not even one I fully understood yet, but a decision nonetheless, small and hard like a seed planted in frozen ground, waiting for the right conditions to grow. I drove home slowly, carefully, through streets slick with ice and regret. And in the quiet of my car, with only the rhythm of windshield wipers for company, I started making lists in my head. Not of grievances, not yet, but of facts, numbers, dates. The currency of proof in a world that measured everything in evidence and receipts. If they wanted me to be grateful just to sit at their table, then I would show them what gratitude really cost. If they wanted to forget my name, I would remind them exactly who I was, but not with anger, not with drama or spectacle, with silence, with careful attention, with the quiet power of someone who'd been underestimated for far too long. The snow kept falling, and I kept driving, and somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear the future calling 2 weeks away, when they would stand at my door, screaming, desperate, finally remembering my name with perfect clarity. But tonight, I was still the man who got nothing at Christmas. Tomorrow, I would start becoming the man who had everything they needed. Sarah came home at 1:30 in the morning. I know because I was sitting in the dark of our living room, my laptop open on the coffee table, bathing the space in cold blue light. I'd been there for hours by then, scrolling through documents, downloading files, organizing the scattered fragments of our life together into neat digital folders with names like financial records and communications and property documents. I heard her key in the lock, the soft tumble of the mechanism, the pause before she pushed the door open. She was drunk, not fall-down drunk, but the kind of drunk that makes you careful, overly precise in your movements. She took off her shoes in the entryway with exaggerated concentration, placed her purse on the side table with the gentleness of someone handling explosives. "You're still up," she said, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite identify. Guilt, maybe? Or relief that we were doing this in the dark, where she couldn't see my face clearly. Couldn't sleep. She moved into the living room, and the laptop light caught her features in unflattering angles, shadows under her eyes, the slight smear of her lipstick, the looseness around her mouth that wine brings. She was still beautiful. That was the cruel part. She could hurt me and still be beautiful. "We should talk about tonight," she said, lowering herself onto the armchair across from me, not the sofa where she might have sat beside me. The geography of the room had shifted, I realized. We were on opposite sides now, and both of us knew it. "Should we?" "Don't do that." A flash of irritation crossed her face. "Don't be passive-aggressive. If you're angry, just say so." I closed the laptop, and the room fell into darkness except for the streetlight filtering through our curtains, turning everything gray and uncertain. "I'm not angry, Sarah. I'm just paying attention." "To what?" "To everything I've been ignoring." I leaned back, felt the familiar shape of our sofa against my spine, and wondered how many more times I'd sit here before everything changed, How long has your family hated me? She was quiet for a long moment. I heard her breathe, heard the settling of the house around us, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. When she spoke, her voice was small, and I almost pitied her. Almost. They don't hate you. Then what would you call it? They don't understand you. You're different from what they expected. She stopped herself, but the words hung there anyway, completing themselves in the silence. From what I expected, from what I wanted, from what I thought I was getting when I said yes to forever. When did it start? I asked. Was it gradual? Or was there a moment when they decided I wasn't good enough? When you decided? That's not fair. Fair, I laughed, and it came out harder than I intended. You sat there tonight while your mother humiliated me, and you said nothing. Your sister mocked me, and you smiled. They gave gifts to everyone, Sarah, including the nanny, and I got nothing. Not even an acknowledgement. And you want to talk about fair? You're making too much of this. It was just what? Just a joke. Just an oversight. Just the way things are. I stood up, needing to move, needing to not be sitting in the shape of a man who accepts this. You know what the worst part was? Not the exclusion, not the laughter. It was watching you choose them over me, again and again, in 1,000 tiny moments throughout the night. She was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing, could see the way she pressed her fingers to her eyes. Once, that sound would have undone me, would have sent me to her side, arms open, ready to apologize for my part in making her unhappy. But something had calcified in me on that drive home through the snow. Something had frozen over like a lake in winter, still there, still present, but no longer accessible. I didn't choose anyone, she said. I was trying to keep the peace, by sacrificing me to it. You're being dramatic. There it was again, that word, dramatic. As if the appropriate response to being erased was to smile and nod and be grateful for the crumbs of belonging they deigned to offer. I'm going to bed, I said. You should too. We're not done talking about this. Yes, I said quietly. We are. I left her there in the dark and climbed the stairs to our bedroom. Our bedroom, though increasingly, it felt like hers, with her things colonizing every surface. Her preferences dictating the temperature and the firmness of the mattress and whether the windows stayed open at night. I lay on my side of the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her move around downstairs. She stayed down there for another hour before finally coming up, sliding into bed with exaggerated care not to touch me, and I lay there counting her breaths until they evened into sleep. But I didn't sleep. I stared into the darkness and began to plan. The thing about architectural drawings, which is what I did, what I'd been doing for 15 years before the layoff, is that they require absolute precision. You can't approximate, you can't guess. Every measurement matters because buildings are unforgiving of error. 1 degree off in your calculations, and walls don't meet. Floors don't align. The whole structure becomes unstable. I'd spent my career measuring things, calculating loads, ensuring that what looked good on paper would stand up to the weight of reality. And as I lay there in the dark beside my sleeping wife, I realized I'd been applying those same principles to the wrong structure. I'd been trying to shore up a marriage that was built on faulty foundations, trying to make myself fit into spaces that were never designed for me. But I could measure other things, document other loads, calculate different kinds of structural integrity. The next morning, Sarah left early for a yoga class. This wasn't unusual. She'd been going 3 times a week for the past 6 months, part of what she called her self-care journey. I'd encouraged it, happy that she was taking time for herself, not noticing that every hour she spent finding herself was an hour spent away from us. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I went to my office, the small second bedroom we designated as my workspace when we bought the house. It had never quite felt like mine. Sarah stored her off-season clothes in the closet. Her exercise equipment occupied one corner, but the desk was mine, and the computer, and that was enough. I started with the easy things: bank statements going back 5 years, credit card records, the mortgage documents. Sarah and I had kept our finances mostly separate. Her insistence. she said, from watching her parents' messy arguments about money. She had her accounts, I had mine, and we had one joint account for household expenses. It had seemed modern, progressive, a sign of mutual respect for each other's autonomy. Now I saw it differently. Separate finances meant separate accountability. It meant I could track exactly what I'd contributed to our life together and what she had. It meant I could document, with the precision of someone who'd spent years reading blueprints, the exact architecture of our marriage. And what I found, as I started pulling together the records, was illuminating. The house we lived in, the 3-bedroom colonial, in the nice neighborhood with the good schools we'd someday need, was in both our names. But the down payment had come entirely from me. $75,000, my life savings, accumulated through a decade of careful budgeting and sacrifice. Sarah had contributed nothing to the purchase, though she'd been very involved in selecting it, in choosing the fixtures and the paint colors, in making it feel like ours. The mortgage payments came from the joint account, which I'd been funding at a rate of about 70% to her 30%. This wasn't because I earned more. In fact, before my layoff, we'd made roughly the same salary. But somehow, my money found its way into the joint account, while hers seemed to evaporate into personal expenses and shopping trips and frequent lunches with her mother and sister. I documented this carefully, creating spreadsheets that tracked every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer. I color-coded them green for my contributions, blue for hers, red for joint expenses. The resulting visual was stark. A sea of green, with small islands of blue, and those islands getting smaller over time. Then I moved to other documents. The car title's mine was in my name alone. A sensible Honda I'd bought, used, and maintained meticulously. Hers was a BMW purchased 8 months ago, and when I pulled up the registration, I saw something that made me pause. The loan was in her name alone, but the co-signer was her father, Thomas. Not me, her husband of 7 years, her father. I sat back in my chair, feeling something click into place. This was a pattern, not an aberration. I started looking at other things with fresh eyes. The credit card she used most frequently, the one she'd said was for building her own credit, had her mother as an authorized user. The investment account she'd mentioned starting last year was held jointly with her sister. Sarah had been building a financial life that ran parallel to our marriage, not through it. Every major decision, every significant asset, every important relationship, she'd kept her family at the center and me at the periphery. I printed everything. Page after page of bank statements and loan documents and credit reports. I organized them into folders, created a timeline, built a narrative that told the story of a man who'd invested everything into a marriage while his wife kept one foot perpetually out the door. But this was just money. Money was easy to track, simple to document. The harder evidence would be emotional, and that required different tools. I opened Sarah's laptop. She'd never bothered to change her password from the one I'd helped her set up years ago, another small indicator of her assumption that I was too passive, too trusting, too fundamentally unthreatening to ever be a problem. Her email was logged in, as was her social media, her text messages backed up to the cloud. I hesitated for a moment. This felt like a line, a boundary I'd never crossed. We'd always had a policy of privacy, of trust, of not surveilling each other like suspicious detectives. But then I remembered sitting in that living room, watching everyone receive their gifts, feeling the weight of my own invisibility. I remembered Sarah's suppressed smile when her sister mocked me. I remembered, "Be grateful you can sit here," and the laughter that followed. I clicked into her messages. The thing about digital communication is that it's permanent. We think of texts and emails as ephemeral, tossed-off thoughts that disappear into the ether. But they don't. They accumulate like sediment, layer upon layer, until you have a complete geological record of a relationship. I started with the family group chat. Sarah, her mother, her sister, her brother. They called it the inner circle, which should have told me everything I needed to know. I scrolled back through months of messages, watching the conversation unspool in reverse. Recent messages were about Christmas logistics and menu planning, and complaints about Daniel's new girlfriend. But then, 2 weeks before Christmas, "What are we doing about you-know-who for presents?" I say we skip him. Mom? Agreed. He can consider dinner his gift. Besides, it's not like he contributed anything this year. Exactly. He's barely working. I'm basically supporting both of us at this point. I stared at that message, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. I'm basically supporting both of us. The lie was so casual, so complete, that it took my breath away. I had been paying more into our joint account than ever since the layoff, using my savings to ensure we didn't miss a payment on anything. I'd taken on every freelance job I could find. I'd been working 70-hour weeks trying to build something sustainable. But in her narrative to her family, I was a deadweight, a burden, someone to be pitied and barely tolerated. I kept scrolling. Is she finally going to leave him? I don't know. I'm thinking about it. But it's complicated. What's complicated? He's clearly not the person you thought he was. I know. You're right. I just need to figure out the logistics. Whenever you're ready, darling, you know we're here for you. You can always come home. Home. Not our house, the one I'd bought, the one I'd painted and repaired and maintained. Her mother's house. That was home in their minds, and I was just a temporary inconvenience, an experiment that hadn't worked out. The messages went back further, months of them, years. I'd been thinking this tension was recent, a product of my job loss and the stress it brought. But no, they'd been discussing me, dissecting me, diminishing me for as long as these messages existed. Sarah, 1 year earlier. Sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake. With marrying him? Honestly, I wondered that at your wedding. He was different then. Or, I thought he was. More ambitious. More, I don't know. More. It's not too late, sweetheart. You're still young. You could start over, maybe after the holidays. I don't want to deal with it right now. But she hadn't dealt with it. Instead, she'd stayed. And every day she stayed while thinking these things, while discussing my deficiencies with her family, while planning her eventual exit every day, was a small betrayal that accumulated into something monstrous. I found messages about me from 3 Christmases ago, when I'd given Martha an expensive scarf I'd saved for. He's so clueless, like she's gonna wear that. At least he tries, in his own pathetic way, I guess. God, I can't believe I have to do this for the rest of my life. The rest of my life. Past tense already. 3 years ago. She'd been planning her escape since then, maybe longer, but she'd stayed. Living in my house, spending my money, sharing my bed, all while counting down the days until she could leave without looking like the bad guy. I took screenshots of everything, organized them by date and theme, created a folder called Context that told a story, not the story Sarah would tell, of a woman trapped in a disappointing marriage, but the truth. A woman who decided I wasn't enough and had spent years convincing her family to validate that decision. But I needed more. Screenshots could be dismissed as taken out of context. I needed something irrefutable. I went back further in her email, looking for something specific, and there it was, buried in a folder labeled Personal, an email from a lawyer, dated 6 months ago. Subject, Reconsultation, Divorce Proceedings. I opened it with hands that had started to shake. Dear Mrs. Richardson, thank you for scheduling a consultation regarding the dissolution of your marriage. Based on our conversation, I've prepared a preliminary assessment of your situation. Given that you've been married for 7 years and the house is jointly titled, you would likely be entitled to approximately 50% of the property value plus spousal support during the transition period, particularly given your spouse's current employment status. I recommend documenting any instances of financial instability or emotional strain that could strengthen your position. As we discussed, the more evidence you have of being the primary financial contributor and emotional caretaker, the more favorable the settlement. Please call my office to schedule a follow-up appointment. She'd been to a lawyer. 6 months ago, while I was scrambling to find work, while I was depleting my savings to keep us afloat, while I was believing her reassurances that we were in this together, she'd been consulting a divorce attorney and strategizing how to take half of everything I'd built. The email continued with attachments documents she'd been advised to gather. Financial records showing my instability. A journal she'd been encouraged to keep documenting my emotional unavailability. A list of marital assets with estimates of their value. She'd been building a case against me, collecting evidence of my inadequacy, like specimens for dissection. Every argument, every difficult conversation, every moment of struggle, she'd been filing it away, weaponizing it, preparing to deploy it in court to paint me as the failure, while she walked away with half of everything and the moral high ground. I printed it all, every email, every attachment, every piece of her carefully constructed narrative, and then I did something I'd never done before. I created a backup of her entire digital life emails, texts, documents, photos, and stored it in 3 separate places: cloud storage, external hard drive, and a folder buried so deep in my own system that she'd never find it. If she wanted to play the game of documentation, of building cases and collecting evidence, then I would play it better. I would play it with the precision of someone who'd spent years ensuring that structures didn't fall. By the time Sarah came home from yoga, flushed and relaxed and carrying a smoothie that cost more than our grocery budget for a day, I was back on the sofa with my laptop, working on a freelance project, like nothing had changed. "Hey," she said, breezing past me toward the kitchen. "How was your morning?" "Productive," I said, and it was the most honest I'd been with her in years. Very productive. She didn't hear the edge in my voice, or if she did, she dismissed it. She was too busy telling me about her yoga class, about the instructor's new meditation technique, about her plans to meet Jennifer for lunch later in the week. I listened and nodded and said all the right things, and inside, I was counting days, counting assets, counting the ways she'd underestimated me. 13 days until they would come to my door. 13 days to build my case. 13 days to show them all what it meant to forget someone's name. The snow had stopped falling, and the sun was breaking through the clouds, and I sat there in its cold light feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. They wanted me to be grateful just to sit at their table? I'd show them gratitude. The kind that came with receipts and documentation and the cold, irrefutable truth of numbers. They thought I was nothing? I'd show them exactly what nothing could do when it stopped being invisible. But first, I'd be patient. I'd be quiet. I'd be the man they expected, passive, grateful, forgettable, right up until the moment I wasn't. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from living with someone who's already left you in every way except physically. You pass each other in hallways that feel too narrow and too wide at the same time. You say good morning and good night like strangers, observing social niceties at a hotel. You sleep in the same bed but occupy different universes, your dreams never touching, your breathing falling into rhythms that deliberately avoid synchronization. I'd been living in this loneliness for longer than I'd admitted to myself, but now that I'd named it, now that I'd seen the evidence of Sarah's betrayal spelled out in her own words, the loneliness became almost companionable. It was honest, at least. It didn't pretend to be something else. The days after Christmas moved with strange elasticity. Time felt both compressed and extended, like those dreams where you're trying to run, but your legs move through molasses. I went through the motions of normal life, made coffee, responded to work emails, had stilted conversations with Sarah about mundane things like grocery shopping and whether we needed to call the plumber about the bathroom sink. But underneath it all, I was working. Every morning after Sarah left for work, she'd been spending longer hours at the office lately, she said, year-end projects and performance reviews, though I now suspected those late nights involved different kinds of reviews. I would descend into the systematic excavation of our life together. I had become an archaeologist of my own marriage, carefully brushing away the dust to reveal the bones of what had really been happening while I'd been too busy trying to be enough. 3 days after Christmas, I found the credit card statements. They were in a box in the back of Sarah's closet, behind the winter coats she never wore, and the designer handbag she rotated through with the precision of a museum curator. The box itself was unremarkable plain cardboard, the kind you'd use for storage and then forget about. But inside was a record of spending that made my careful budgeting and sacrifice look like a child's game. Nordstrom, Saks Fifth Avenue, Whole Foods purchases that averaged $300 per trip when I was shopping at Aldi to keep our grocery costs down. Spa treatments every 2 weeks, facials and massages, and something called a hydrofacial that cost more than our monthly utilities. Lunches at restaurants where the appetizers cost what I spent on an entire meal. And all of it on a credit card I'd never seen. One that wasn't linked to our joint finances. One that existed in that parallel financial life she'd constructed. I photographed every statement, every charge, every late fee for months when she'd apparently forgotten to pay. The total was staggering. Over the past 3 years, she'd accumulated $47,000 in debt on this single card. $47,000 spent on herself, while her family told the lawyer that she was supporting us both. But the credit card statements revealed something else. Something that made my hands still as I read through the fine print. The billing address wasn't our house, it was her parents' address. Which meant the statements had been going there all along. Which meant her parents knew about this debt, this spending, this separate financial life. Which meant they'd been complicit in her deception from the beginning. I sat there on the closet floor, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, and felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. Something that felt like understanding, crystallizing into purpose. They'd treated me like nothing at Christmas dinner, because they'd been preparing for my erasure all along. Every slight, every dismissal, every casual cruelty. It was groundwork. They were building a narrative where I was the problem, the failure, the deadweight Sarah needed to shed. And when she finally pulled the trigger on the divorce, they'd all nod sympathetically and say they'd seen it coming, that she'd tried so hard to make it work with someone so clearly beneath her. I took the box with me when I left the closet, photographed every document, every statement, every receipt. Then I put it all back exactly as I'd found it, the box positioned at the same angle, the coats hanging with the same spacing. Sarah would never know I'd been there, but I would know. And when the time came, so would everyone else. That afternoon, I had a video call with a client. It was a small job redesigning a garage conversion for a young couple in Portland, but I approached it with the same care I'd given to major commercial projects back when I had a staff and a corner office, and the illusion of security. The couple was enthusiastic, full of ideas, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the work, the problem solving, the creativity of taking their vision and making it structurally sound. "You're really good at this," the wife said at the end of our call. "I can't believe you're freelancing. Some firm should have snatched you up by now." "I'm building something different," I told her. And I realized as I said it that it was true. I was building something. Not just a freelance career, but a different version of myself. Someone who didn't need validation from people who'd decided he had no value. Someone who could document his worth in concrete terms and present it without apology. "Well, we're lucky to have you," she said. "Same time next week? I'll send you the updated plans before then." After the call, I sat looking at my design software, at the clean lines and precise measurements, and I thought about how much easier it was to build structures than to build a life. Structures followed rules. Calculations didn't lie. Materials had predictable properties. But people were chaos, pretending to be order, promises pretending to be certainties, love pretending to be permanent, when really it was just a series of decisions someone could stop making at any time. Sarah came home at 7 that evening, later than she'd said she would be, her explanation involving a last-minute meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. She was carrying takeout from an expensive Thai place downtown, the kind of place we used to go to for anniversaries before money got tight or before I'd thought money was tight, before I'd discovered her $47,000 secret. "Peace offering," she said, holding up the bags. "I know I've been distant lately. Work has been crazy, and I feel like we've barely seen each other." I looked at her standing in our kitchen, my kitchen, purchased with my down payment, maintained with my labor, and I wondered when exactly she'd become such an accomplished liar. Had she always been this way, and I'd been too dazzled by her to notice? Or was this a skill she'd developed over the years, the way you might learn a language through immersion? "That's nice of you," I said, and I meant it. It was nice. A performance of niceness, calculated to ease her guilt or maintain the facade or simply avoid an uncomfortable conversation, but nice nonetheless. We ate at the dining table, sitting across from each other in chairs that suddenly felt like they were miles apart. She talked about her day, about office politics and a difficult client and her boss's unreasonable expectations. I listened and asked appropriate questions and watched her perform the role of stressed but devoted wife, and I wondered if she knew I could see the seams in her performance now. The places where the mask didn't quite fit. "How's your project going?" she asked, gesturing with her fork at my laptop, which sat closed on the counter. "The garage conversion? Good. They're nice people. They actually appreciate the work." Something flickered across her face at that defensiveness, maybe, or recognition of the implication. "I appreciate your work," she said. "Do you?" "Of course I do. You're talented. I've always said that." "To me, maybe. But what do you say to your family?" The question hung in the air between us. I watched her process it, saw the calculations happening behind her eyes. She could deflect, get angry, turn it around on me. But she chose something different, a version of truth carefully curated to sound like the whole story. "They don't understand what you do," she said carefully. "Architecture, design, it's abstract to them. They think in terms of traditional careers, stable jobs. It doesn't mean they don't respect you, doesn't it?" "You're being paranoid." "Am I?" I set down my fork, the gentle click of metal against ceramic, somehow loud in the quiet room. "Your mother told me to be grateful I could sit at her table. Your sister said I should be glad they remember my name. And you sat there and said nothing. So tell me, Sarah, what exactly am I being paranoid about?" She flinched, and I felt that small, bitter satisfaction again. "I told you, they didn't mean it that way. It was a joke. Who was it funny for?" "You're twisting this." "I'm trying to understand," I said, and I kept my voice level, reasonable, the way you might discuss a structural problem with a client. "I'm trying to understand how we got here, how I became someone it's acceptable to humiliate, how you became someone who'd let that happen." "I didn't let anything happen. You're being oversensitive. You always do this. Take things too personally. Read too much into casual comments." "What should I read into them instead?" She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not doing this. I tried to have a nice dinner with you, tried to connect, and you're turning it into an interrogation." "I asked a question." "You asked an accusation disguised as a question." She started clearing the table with sharp, angry movements. "This is why they—" She stopped herself. But too late. "Why they what?" "Nothing." "Say it." "This is why they what, Sarah?" She turned to face me, and for just a moment, I saw something raw in her expression. Not love, we were past that. Maybe had always been past that. But something honest, at least. "This is why they worry about me," she said quietly. "This is why they think you're difficult." Difficult. I tasted the word, felt its edges. "Is that what you tell them? That I'm difficult?" "You can be. You fixate on things. You hold grudges. You're so sensitive about everything." Being hurt by cruelty isn't sensitivity. It's having a normal human response to being treated badly. "See? This is what I mean. Everything is some grand offense. Everything is cruelty. Can't things just be things? Can't jokes just be jokes? Can't you just let things go?" I stood up too, gathered my plate, walked it to the sink. "I could," I said. "I have been. For years. I've been letting things go so much that I've disappeared. I've become so accommodating, so understanding, so fucking grateful just to sit at the table that I've forgotten I'm allowed to expect basic respect." "I respect you. You consulted a divorce lawyer 6 months ago." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the color drain from her face, watched her mouth open and close, watched her scramble for a response and find nothing. "How did you—" She started, then stopped. "You went through my things." "Yes, you had no right, didn't I?" I turned to face her fully. "We're married, Sarah. We share a life. Or we're supposed to. But you've been planning your exit for months. You've been documenting my inadequacies. You've been building a case against me while I've been trying to save us. So yes, I went through your things. And you know what I found?" She didn't answer, just stood there, with her hand pressed to her mouth. "I found out you've been lying to everyone. Lying about our finances. Lying about who supports whom. Lying about why you're unhappy. Creating a narrative where I'm the villain so you can leave with everyone's blessing and half of everything I've built. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Explain it to me. Make me understand how consulting a divorce lawyer while telling me we're fine is anything other than betrayal." Tears were streaming down her face now, but I felt nothing. No urge to comfort her. No softening of my resolve. I'd spent so many years managing her emotions, making sure she was happy, sacrificing my own needs to keep the peace. But those years were done. "I was scared," she said. "I wanted to know my options. It doesn't mean I was going to. I haven't decided anything." "Haven't you?" "Because those messages to your family tell a different story. The ones where you discuss leaving me, where you call me pathetic, where you count down the time until you can escape." I was venting. Everyone vents to their family. Everyone doesn't plan their exit strategy while pretending everything is fine. Everyone doesn't spend $47,000 on themselves while crying poverty to their lawyer. Her face went white. You found that?" "I found everything, Sarah. All of it. Every lie, every secret, every piece of the double life you've been living." She sank into a chair, her whole body collapsing in on itself. "What are you going to do?" It was the right question, finally. Not defensiveness or deflection or accusations of my invasion of her privacy. Just the essential question. What comes next? "I don't know yet," I said. And it was the truth. I had evidence. I had documentation. I had the receipts of her deception, organized in folders and backed up in 3 places. But what to do with them, how to deploy them, when to reveal them, what outcome I actually wanted that was still forming. "Are you going to divorce me?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "I thought that was your plan." "I don't know what I want. I'm confused. Everything is so complicated." "It's actually very simple." I leaned against the counter, feeling the cool marble against my palms, grounding myself in something solid. "You've been unhappy. You've been planning to leave. You've consulted a lawyer. You've turned your family against me. You've lied about our finances. These aren't complicated things, Sarah. They're choices, deliberate choices you've made. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did. You are. Every day you stayed while planning to leave. Every conversation with your family where you painted me as a failure. Every dollar you spent while telling everyone I was the financial burden, all of it hurt me. And the worst part is, you knew it would. You just didn't care enough to stop." She was sobbing now, the kind of raw, ugly crying that might have moved me once. But I'd crossed some threshold. I'd seen too much, knew too much, understood too clearly that her tears were for herself, not for what she'd done to me. "I'm going to bed," I said. "You can sleep in the guest room. This is my house, too." "Is it? Because according to your lawyer, you're entitled to half of it despite contributing nothing to the down payment and barely anything to the mortgage. According to you and your family, I should be grateful you've let me live here at all. So which is it, Sarah? Is this your house? Or are you just a guest who's overstayed her welcome?" She had no answer for that. I left her in the kitchen and climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my bedroom, for tonight at least. I locked the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, my hand shaking now that the confrontation was over, the adrenaline draining out of me in waves. I'd shown my hand too early. That was a mistake. I should have waited, should have kept gathering evidence, should have let her think I was still the passive, oblivious husband she could manipulate at will. But I'd been angry, and anger had made me impulsive. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was necessary. Because now she knew I knew, and that changed the game entirely. She'd be more careful now, more guarded, but she'd also be afraid. And fear made people do revealing things. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. Started recording. "December 28th, I said softly. Sarah confirmed awareness of the divorce consultation. Admitted to the spending on the hidden credit card. Didn't deny the messages to her family. claimed she was confused and venting, but couldn't explain why she'd been building a case against me for 6 months while maintaining the pretense of our marriage. I stopped the recording, saved it with a timestamp and date. Another piece of evidence. Another receipt. My phone buzzed with a text. Sarah, from downstairs. I'm sorry. I know I messed up. Can we please talk about this? I typed a response, deleted it, typed another. Not tonight. When? When I'm ready. I turned off my phone and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark. 10 days until they would come to my door. 10 days to decide what I wanted from this. What justice looked like. What revenge tasted like when it was served cold and backed by irrefutable documentation. Part of me wanted to hurt them the way they'd hurt me, wanted to expose Sarah's lies to everyone who'd believed her narrative. Wanted to see the look on Martha's face when she realized I wasn't the charity case she thought I was. Wanted Jennifer's smug superiority to crack when confronted with the truth about her sister's betrayal. But another part of me, the part that had been an architect, that had built things meant to last, wanted something more permanent than hurt feelings. Wanted structural change. Wanted to dismantle the edifice of lies so completely that it could never be rebuilt. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and planned, the way I'd planned countless buildings, starting with the foundation and working my way up. The foundation was truth, documentation, evidence that couldn't be disputed. The structure was strategy, knowing when to reveal what to whom for maximum impact. And the finishing touches, those would be the moments I showed them exactly what they'd underestimated. Exactly what happens when you tell someone to be grateful just to exist in your presence. They wanted me to know my place. I'd show them a place they'd never forget. Sarah slept in the guest room that night, and the next, and the one after that. We moved around each other like dancers who'd forgotten the choreography. Careful not to touch, careful not to look directly at each other for too long. The house had always been quiet, but now the silence had texture, thick and suffocating, the kind that pressed against your eardrums and made you hyper-aware of every small sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the settling of floorboards, the sound of her footsteps overhead, pacing, always pacing. She was afraid. I could feel it radiating off her like heat. She didn't know what I was going to do with the information I'd discovered, and the not knowing was eating at her. She'd texted me 17 times that first day after our confrontation. Calls I didn't answer. Apologies that felt less like remorse and more like damage control. Please, can we talk? I know I hurt you. I want to explain. This silence is killing me. At least tell me what you're thinking. I responded to none of them. Let her sit with the uncertainty the way I'd sat with the uncertainty of her love for years. Never quite sure if I was enough. Never quite able to relax into the security of being chosen. But while she spiraled in her anxiety, I worked. I'd taken 2 days off from freelance projects, told my clients I had a family emergency, which was true in its way. I spent those 48 hours building something I'd never built before. A complete forensic accounting of our marriage. Every shared expense, every joint purchase, every dollar that had flowed through our lives together. I tracked it all. I created spreadsheets that would have impressed my old accounting professors, color-coded and cross-referenced, with formulas that calculated percentages and disparities, and the cold mathematical truth of who had invested what. The house. I'd contributed $75,000 for the down payment. Sarah had contributed nothing. Over 7 years of mortgage payments, I'd paid $147,000 into the joint account that funded the mortgage. She'd paid $63,000. The house was worth $425,000 now. By any reasonable calculation, I owned approximately 72% of it. The cars. Mine was paid for, worth maybe $12,000. Hers was financed, with $31,000 still owed, on a loan I'd just discovered was co-signed by her father, meaning I had no liability for it whatsoever. Furniture, appliances, home improvements. I had receipts for all of it. The new HVAC system, $8,700, paid from my savings. The kitchen renovation Sarah had insisted we needed $22,000, funded entirely by me taking on extra projects and working weekends for 6 months. The landscaping, the new roof, the finished basement where Sarah did yoga and stored her collection of things she'd bought and never used, all of it documented, all of it paid for by me. Her credit card debt, $47,000 and growing, with an interest rate of 24.99% because she'd missed so many payments. Her student loans, $63,000 remaining, on an original amount of $85,000, meaning she'd barely made a dent in them over the past decade. Her car loan, $31,000. Total debt in her name alone, $141,000. My debts, $0. I'd paid off my student loans 5 years ago, had no credit card debt, owned my car outright. I created a visual representation of this, a chart that showed, in stark black and white, the financial reality of our marriage. It looked like a chasm. On one side, my contributions, steady, substantial, quantifiable. On the other, hers, minimal, erratic, and accompanied by massive debt she'd been hiding. And yet she'd told the lawyer and her family that she was supporting us both, that I was the financial burden, that she deserved not just half of everything, but spousal support because of my instability. The lie was so audacious it almost impressed me. But I wasn't done. Financial records were just one piece. I needed the full picture. On the third day after our confrontation, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to a video meeting with a client actually sick. I told them, apologetic and hoarse-voiced, could we reschedule for next week? They were understanding, told me to feel better, and I felt a small stab of guilt for the deception. But I needed the time. Because Sarah had left for work early, mentioning something about an all-day workshop, and I had the house to myself, and a growing suspicion that there were more secrets buried in places I hadn't thought to look. I started in her home office, the small room off the kitchen that she'd claimed as her workspace when she'd started working from home 2 days a week. It was decorated in a style that was pure Sarah, minimalist and expensive, everything white and chrome and carefully curated. A desk that cost more than my first car. A chair that was supposedly ergonomic and definitely overpriced. Floating shelves displaying books she'd never read, but that looked impressive. Her filing cabinet was locked. I'd never noticed that before, or if I had, I'd assumed it was just a quirk of the furniture. But now, looking at that small silver lock, I felt the weight of its significance. What do you lock away in your own home, from your own husband, unless it's something you desperately don't want him to find? I could have picked the lock. It was a simple mechanism, the kind designed to deter casual snooping, not determined investigation. But I didn't need to, because I knew Sarah, knew her patterns, knew she was the kind of person who'd choose convenience over security. I checked the obvious places, the desk drawer, under the keyboard, taped to the bottom of the desk, found it in the pencil holder, a small silver key, nestled among pens she never used, and highlighters still in their packaging. The filing cabinet opened with a soft click that sounded, in the quiet house, like a door closing on our marriage. Inside were folders, so many folders, and they told a story I hadn't been prepared to read. The first folder was labeled Family Trust. I opened it with hands that had started shaking again and found documents dating back 3 years. Sarah was a beneficiary of a family trust. Her grandmother had established something she'd never mentioned to me, not once in our 7 years of marriage. The trust was worth $3.2 million, divided among Martha's children and grandchildren. Sarah's share, which she'd receive full access to when she turned 35, or in the event of divorce or widowhood, was $425,000. I read that clause 3 times. In the event of divorce, the trust was structured to pay out if she divorced me. Not if we stayed married, then she'd have to wait another 3 years until her 35th birthday. But if she divorced me, she'd get the money immediately. The trust had been modified 2 years ago. I could see the amendment paperwork, notarized and official. The divorce clause had been added then, 2 years ago, when Sarah had started pulling away, when the distance between us had started widening from a crack to a canyon. They'd been planning this for years. Not months, years. The second folder contained correspondence with a financial advisor. I skimmed the emails, feeling sick as I absorbed their content. Sarah had been discussing asset protection strategies for 18 months. The advisor had recommended keeping certain accounts separate, documenting any financial instability on my part, maintaining clear records of her contributions versus mine. Except the records she'd been keeping were fiction. There were spreadsheets in this folder showing her as the primary breadwinner, listing expenses she claimed to have paid that I knew I had paid. The kitchen renovation was attributed to her. The new roof was listed as her contribution. Even the down payment on the house, the $75,000 that had come entirely from my savings, was noted as a joint contribution, with her providing the majority share. She'd been creating an alternate financial reality, a parallel universe where she was the responsible one, the provider, the adult in the relationship, and I was the drain on her resources. The third folder was the one that broke something in me. It was labeled documentation, and it contained a journal, a physical, handwritten journal that Sarah had been keeping for over a year. I opened it to a random page and read, March 15th, another argument about money. He doesn't understand the pressure I'm under, supporting both of us while he looks for projects. He got defensive when I suggested he might need to lower his rates to get more work. Sometimes I wonder if he's even trying. Mom says I should document these conversations in case I need them later. She's probably right. None of this had happened. We hadn't argued about money in March. I'd been working steadily, had 3 ongoing projects that month, had actually made more than Sarah. But here it was, written in her careful handwriting, a fiction presented as fact. I flipped through more pages, reading entry after entry of a marriage I didn't recognize, arguments that had never happened, financial struggles that were invented, emotional manipulation that existed only in her imagination or in the narrative she was constructing. April 3rd. He forgot our anniversary again, didn't even acknowledge it. When I brought it up, he said he'd been too busy with work to remember. This is the 3rd year in a row. I'm starting to think he doesn't value our relationship at all, but I hadn't forgotten our anniversary. I'd taken her to dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, had given her a bracelet she'd admired months before, had made reservations weeks in advance because I knew how much these things mattered to her. Unless I pulled out my phone, checked the calendar, felt my stomach drop. Our anniversary was April 8th. She'd written this entry on April 3rd, 5 days before the anniversary that I hadn't forgotten at all. She'd documented a failure before it could even happen, had created evidence of my neglect proactively, just in case she needed it. I photographed every page of that journal, every invented slight, every fabricated argument, every rewritten history. Then I found the other documents in the folder, screenshots of text messages that had been edited, emails with key context removed, even photos of our house that were taken to make it look more run down than it was, presumably to show how I wasn't maintaining the property. This wasn't just deception. This wasn't just a woman having doubts about her marriage. This was systematic, calculated fraud. This was someone building a legal case based on lies, manufacturing evidence to destroy me in a divorce court, ensuring that when she left, she'd leave with everything and I'd be painted as the villain who'd driven her away. And her family had helped her do it. There were emails in the folder from Martha, from Jennifer, coaching Sarah on what to document, how to phrase things, what would play well if it ever came to court. From Martha Richardson to Sarah Richardson. Subject: Conversation records. Darling, remember to focus on patterns, not isolated incidents. Courts respond to narratives of ongoing neglect or financial irresponsibility. Keep the tone factual, but make sure the emotional impact is clear. Jennifer's lawyer said that documented evidence of emotional unavailability can be very compelling, especially when combined with financial instability. Also, make sure you're keeping all your receipts for anything you pay for, even small things. It all adds up to show you're the one holding things together. Love you, sweetheart. You're doing the right thing. You deserve so much better than what you've settled for. I sat there on the floor of Sarah's office, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy to destroy me, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Not my heart, that had been breaking slowly for months, maybe years. Something else. Some last reservoir of goodwill, of benefit of the doubt, of willingness to believe that people were fundamentally decent even when they hurt you. They weren't trying to end a marriage. They were trying to annihilate me, to rewrite history so thoroughly that even I might start to doubt my own memories. To take everything I'd built and claim it as theirs, while painting me as a parasite who'd contributed nothing. And they'd been doing it with the casual cruelty of people who believed they had every right to treat me this way because I was, in their eyes, fundamentally less than them, less worthy, less valuable, less real. I photographed everything in that filing cabinet, every document, every email, every page of that poisonous journal. I created backups of the backups, stored them in places Sarah would never think to look. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, locked the cabinet, replaced the key in the pencil holder, straightened the papers on her desk that I'd disturbed. When I was done, the room looked untouched. But I had walked out of there with something Sarah couldn't take back, the complete, documented truth. That evening, Sarah came home at her usual time, carrying another peace-offering dinner. Italian this time, from the place near her office. She set it on the counter with the air of someone performing a ritual she didn't quite believe in anymore. "I got your favorite," she said. "Chicken marsala." I looked at the takeout container and remembered all the times I'd told her my favorite was actually the mushroom ravioli, but she'd never been good at remembering the small things about me, or maybe she just never cared enough to try. "Thank you," I said, and I saw her relax slightly at my civil tone. We ate in near silence, the kind of quiet that's heavy with things unsaid. She kept glancing at me, waiting for something: anger, questions, accusations. But I gave her nothing. Just ate my chicken marsala that I didn't particularly want, and thought about the journal upstairs, about the manufactured reality she'd been living in while I'd been living in the actual one. "I've been thinking," she said finally, pushing her pasta around her plate. "Maybe we should try counseling, couples therapy. There are things we need to work through, obviously, but maybe with a professional." "No." She looked up, startled. "No? Just like that?" "Just like that. But we need help. We can't fix this on our own." "There's nothing to fix, Sarah. You've been planning to leave for years. You've been documenting a marriage that doesn't exist. You've been lying to everyone about who I am and what I've contributed. You can't counsel your way out of that level of betrayal." "I wasn't. It's not like that." "Isn't it? Then tell me what it's like. Explain the journal. Explain the family trust that pays out if you divorce me. Explain the financial advisor teaching you how to hide assets and manufacture evidence." Her face went completely white. You went through my office? You went through our marriage with a blueprint for ending it. I'd say we're even. That's different. That's private. Those are my things. And this is my life you've been systematically dismantling. So yes, I looked, and I found exactly what I expected to find. Proof that you've been building a case against me while pretending to be my wife. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I want you to leave. This is my house. It's our house." "Is it? Because according to your fabricated records, you paid for most of it. According to reality, I put down the entire down payment and paid 70% of the mortgage. So which version are we going with, Sarah? The truth or the story you've been telling?" "Get out." Her voice was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. "Just get out. I can't do this anymore." "I'm not going anywhere. If you want me gone, you'll have to file for divorce. And when you do, I'll see you in court with every document, every receipt, every piece of evidence that shows exactly who's been supporting whom." "You're being cruel." "I'm being honest. There's a difference, though I understand why you might not recognize it." She grabbed her purse and her coat, moving with jerky, panicked movements. "I'm going to my mother's." "Of course you are. Don't contact me. Don't call. Don't text. I need space to think." "Take all the space you need, but leave your key. If you're leaving, you're not coming back without my permission. She stared at me like I'd become someone she didn't recognize. Maybe I had. Maybe the man she'd married, the one who'd absorbed every slight, accepted every humiliation, made himself small enough to fit into the spaces they'd allowed him, was finally, irrevocably gone. She pulled her house key off her keyring, the metal catching the light as she set it on the counter with a sharp click. Then she walked out, and I listened to her car start, listened to the sound of her leaving, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty. 7 days until they would come to my door. 7 days to prepare for the conversation that would change everything. 7 days to show them what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. I picked up her key from the counter, felt its weight in my palm. Then I went upstairs and began the next phase of documentation. Because if Sarah thought running to her mother would solve anything, she was about to discover that some problems followed you. Some truths couldn't be outrun. And some people, when you pushed them far enough, pushed back with the precision of an architect who'd been measuring the cracks in your foundation all along. The house felt different without Sarah in it. Not better exactly, but cleaner somehow. Like when you finally remove a piece of furniture that's been blocking a window and realize how much light you'd been living without. I walked through rooms that had felt oppressive for months and found myself breathing easier, moving more freely, occupying space without apology. She'd been gone for 3 days. 3 days of silence from her, though not from her family. They'd started texting me on day 2, casual at first, testing the waters. "Hey, Sarah mentioned you two had a fight. Everything okay?" I'd stared at that message for a long time, marveling at the calculated innocence of it. A fight. As if what had happened between us was a simple disagreement, a lover's spat, something that could be smoothed over with time and apologies. Not the systematic unraveling of years of deception. I didn't respond. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. I understand you and Sarah are having difficulties. Perhaps some time apart would be beneficial. She's welcome here as long as she needs. As long as she needs. The presumption in that phrase was staggering. The assumption that Sarah was the one who needed refuge, that I was the problem she needed space from, that their home was a sanctuary from the marriage I had somehow made unbearable. I didn't respond to that either. But I did something else, something I'd been avoiding for months, maybe years, because I'd been so focused on trying to fit into Sarah's world that I'd neglected my own. I called my brother, Marcus, not Sarah's brother-in-law Marcus, but my younger brother Marcus, who lived in Seattle and worked in tech, and who I'd been slowly losing touch with as my marriage consumed more and more of my energy, answered on the 3rd ring. "Holy shit," he said instead of hello. "Is this actually my brother, or did someone steal his phone? It's me. Let me check the calendar. Yeah, it's not my birthday, not Christmas, not a major disaster. So why are you calling?" I deserved that. I'd been a terrible brother for years, too wrapped up in trying to be a good husband to maintain the relationships that had existed before Sarah. "I need to talk," I said. "Do you have time?" The joking tone left his voice immediately. "Always. What's going on?" And I told him. Not everything, even now. There was a part of me that felt like airing these particular grievances was a betrayal of some code I didn't quite understand. But I told him enough. About Christmas dinner, about the consultation with the divorce lawyer, about the hidden debt and the fabricated journal and the systematic campaign to rewrite our history. Marcus was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then, Jesus Christ, I never liked her, you know. You never said anything. Would you have listened? You were so gone for her, so determined to make it work. Every time I visited, I could see it the way she looked at you, like you were some kind of project she was stuck with. The way her family treated you like hired help, but you seemed happy, or like you were trying to be happy, and I figured, I don't know. I figured maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being overprotective. You weren't wrong. I wish I'd said something anyway. Pushed harder. Maybe. It wouldn't have mattered, I said. And I meant it. I wasn't ready to hear it. I had to get here on my own. So, what are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? The one I'd been circling for days, approaching from different angles, trying to find the answer that felt like justice, rather than just revenge. I don't know yet, I admitted. I have all this evidence, all this documentation. I could destroy her in court, expose her lies to everyone who believed them. But then what? We're both miserable, both broke from legal fees, both carrying this ugliness forward? Or, Marcus said slowly, you could use what you know to negotiate from a position of strength. Make sure you're protected. Make sure she can't rewrite history. And then walk away from all of them and build something better. That's simple? Nothing about this is simple. But you're an architect, man. You know how to look at a structure and determine if it's worth saving, or if you need to demolish it and start fresh. What's your professional assessment of this marriage? I looked around the living room at the furniture we'd chosen together, the photos on the walls that told the story of a love I'd believed in, the whole carefully constructed facade of a happy life. Condemned, I said. Foundations rotted, whole things coming down. Then stop trying to patch it. Document everything, protect yourself, and let it fall. We talked for another hour, about nothing and everything. About his life in Seattle, about the woman he'd been seeing, about our parents and whether we should visit them more often. Normal brother things, the kind of conversation I'd been starving for without realizing it. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Supported, believed. Seen by someone who knew me before, I'd become the diminished version of myself that Sarah's family found so easy to dismiss. I wasn't alone in this. I'd felt alone, isolated in that house, in that marriage, in that family that would never accept me. But I had people too. I'd just forgotten to maintain those connections while I was busy trying to earn connections I'd never actually have. On the 4th day of Sarah's absence, I received a text from an unknown number. Unknown. We need to talk. This is Thomas, Sarah's father. I stared at the message, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that any interaction with her family brought. But underneath the anxiety was something new, curiosity. What exactly did Thomas think we needed to talk about? What script had they prepared for this conversation? About what? Thomas, Sarah, the situation between you two. I think there's been some miscommunication that needs clearing up. Miscommunication, another carefully chosen word, designed to minimize and deflect. Not lies or betrayal or systematic deception, just miscommunication, as if we'd simply failed to understand each other clearly. I understand the situation perfectly. Nevertheless, I think we should speak in person, man to man. I'd like to buy you lunch tomorrow. I almost laughed. Man to man. As if he'd ever treated me like a man, like an equal, like someone worthy of respect. But I was curious what this was really about, what they thought they could salvage, how they planned to spin this. Fine. Noon. Riverside Grill. I chose the restaurant deliberately. A nice place, but not expensive. Public, but not so public that a conversation would be impossible. And critically, not anywhere associated with their family, not on their territory. I'll be there. I spent the rest of that day preparing for the conversation the way I might prepare for a difficult client meeting. I knew what I wanted out of it, information, primarily. I wanted to understand their game plan, their strategy, what they thought they knew, and what they were still guessing about. And I wanted them to understand that I wasn't the pushover they'd always assumed I was. But I also did something else, something that felt both petty and deeply satisfying. I called a locksmith and had the locks changed on the house. Sarah had left her key, but who knew how many copies existed? Who knew if Martha had a spare, or Jennifer, or if Sarah had made extras before leaving? The locksmith, a weathered man in his 60s who'd clearly seen his share of domestic drama, didn't ask questions. Just changed the locks efficiently, handed me 3 new keys, and wished me luck in a tone that suggested I'd need it. After he left, I walked through the house testing doors, feeling the solid click of new locks, engaging, and experienced a moment of profound relief. This was mine. My space, my sanctuary, my foundation, and I was the only one who could grant access to it now. That evening, I worked on a freelance project, a small commercial renovation. Nothing glamorous, but honest work that paid well. I found myself lost in it. in the clean logic of structural problems and practical solutions. The client wanted to convert a warehouse into artist studios, and there was something poetic about that. Taking something industrial and utilitarian and transforming it into spaces where people could create. Maybe that's what I was doing with myself. Taking the utilitarian structure of the man I'd become, the one who'd learned to be small and quiet and grateful for scraps, and converting it into something else. Something that could create, rather than just endure. Around 10, my phone buzzed with a call. Sarah. I stared at her name on the screen, debated answering, decided I might as well hear what she had to say. Hello? You changed the locks. Her voice was tight, barely controlled fury underneath a veneer of calm. I did. That's my house too. You left. You said you couldn't do this anymore. You asked for space, so I'm giving you space. That doesn't mean you can lock me out of my own home. It's not your home if you've chosen to leave it. And legally, since I paid for the down payment and the majority of the mortgage, it's actually much more my home than yours. You can't just I have things there. My clothes, my personal items. Text me a list. I'll pack them up. You can arrange a time to pick them up. Silence on the other end. Then, why are you being like this? Like what? Cold. Calculating. This isn't you, isn't it? Or is it just that you never bothered to find out who I actually was? You were too busy deciding who you wanted me to be, and then being disappointed when I didn't match your expectations. That's not fair. Fair. That word again, deployed like a weapon by people who'd never had to worry about whether they were being treated fairly because they'd always been on the winning side of every equation. You're right, I said. It's not fair. None of this is fair. Not the way you lied to me. Not the way you lied about me. Not the way your family treated me while you stood by and let it happen. Not the journal full of fiction you've been keeping to use against me. Not the fact that you've been planning to leave for years while I've been trying to save us. None of it is fair, Sarah. So forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned about fairness right now. My father wants to talk to you. I know. We're having lunch tomorrow. She sounded surprised. You agreed? I'm curious what he has to say. What story you've all concocted. How you plan to paint me as the villain when I have documentation proving otherwise. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Don't I? Your father's a real estate developer. He's used to getting his way, used to negotiations and leverage and intimidation. Your mother's old money, used to social hierarchies and determining who's worthy of her time. Your sister, married up, plays the game perfectly. And you learned from all of them how to manipulate and scheme and rewrite reality to suit your narrative. But here's what you don't understand. I've spent 7 years studying all of you. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. He's going to offer you money. That stopped me. What? To go away quietly. To agree to the divorce without contesting it. To sign whatever papers they put in front of you. That's his move. He solves problems with money. And he thinks you're a problem that can be solved. How much? I don't know. Enough to make it worth your while, probably. He'll frame it as being generous, taking care of you, making sure you land on your feet. But really, it's paying you to disappear and keep your mouth shut about everything you've found. I absorbed this information, felt it slot into place with everything else I knew about them. Of course, that was their strategy. Money solved everything in their world, made problems vanish, bought silence, purchased complicity, and if I don't take it, then he'll make things difficult. He has lawyers on retainer. Good ones. Expensive ones. He'll drag this out. Make it cost you more than you can afford. He'll bury you in paperwork and depositions and legal fees until you give up or go broke. That's what he does, how he operates. He'll tell you he's giving you a choice, but really, there's only one option that doesn't end with you destroyed. He told you all this? Not directly, but I know how he thinks. I've watched him do it to other people who got in his way. Her voice softened slightly. Take the money, please. Let this end as cleanly as possible. We both made mistakes. We both hurt each other. But we don't have to annihilate each other. We both hurt each other. I repeated. You really believe that? You think my crime, falling in love with you, trying to be a good husband, working to support us, is equivalent to you lying, hiding debt, consulting divorce lawyers while pretending everything was fine, keeping a false journal to use against me in court? I was protecting myself. From what? From having a husband who loved you? From building a life together? What exactly was the threat I posed that required this level of deception? She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Probably, because to answer honestly would be to admit that I'd never been the problem. That the problem was her own dissatisfaction, her own inability to be happy with something real because she'd been raised to believe she deserved something extraordinary. And I, with my middle-class background and my practical career and my earnest attempts to belong, I was too ordinary for the life she'd been promised. "I have to go," she said finally. "But think about what I said, about the offer. It might be your best option. Or," I said quietly, "it might be that your father is the one who needs to worry about his options. Because I have documentation of everything, Sarah. Every lie, every fabrication, every piece of evidence you manufactured. And I'm very good at documentation. It's literally what I do for a living." "You wouldn't. Dzation Pakrup." "Wouldn't what? Defend myself? Protect what's mine? Refuse to be bought off and sent away like some embarrassing problem? You're right. The old me wouldn't. The man who sat at your mother's table and accepted humiliation with a smile wouldn't, but I'm not that man anymore. You and your family made sure of that." I hung up before she could respond. Sat there in the quiet of my house, and let the adrenaline drain out of me in slow waves. They thought they could buy me off. Thought money would be enough to make me disappear, to purchase my silence, to erase the inconvenient truth of what had really happened in this marriage. But they'd miscalculated. They'd measured my worth in dollars and assumed I'd accept their valuation. They'd forgotten that some things couldn't be bought. Some things, dignity, truth, justice, existed outside the economy they understood. Tomorrow, I'd sit across from Thomas and listen to his offer. I'd let him make his pitch, deploy his intimidation tactics, try to make me feel small and powerless and grateful for whatever crumbs he decided to throw my way. And then I'd show him what happens when you try to buy someone who's already decided they're not for sale. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, playing out scenarios in my head. The conversation with Thomas, the various ways it could go, what I'd say, how he'd respond, where the leverage points were. But underneath the strategic thinking was something else, a kind of grief I hadn't let myself feel yet. Because despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayal and the systematic campaign to diminish me, I'd loved Sarah once. Maybe still love some ghost of who I'd thought she was, or who she'd been in the beginning before disappointment calcified into contempt. 7 years of my life had been invested in this marriage. 7 years of hope and effort and compromise. And now I was dismantling it with the precision of an architect identifying load-bearing walls, determining what could be removed without bringing down the entire structure. Except the structure was already coming down. Had been coming down for years. I was just finally admitting it. Around 3 a.m, I got up and went to my office, opened the folder labeled Evidence on my computer, and began organizing everything chronologically. Bank statements and credit card bills and text messages and emails, all arranged in a timeline that told the complete story of our marriage from financial records alone. It was damning, irrefutable. The kind of documentation that would make any judge pause, any lawyer reconsider their strategy. And tomorrow, I'd show Thomas enough of it to make him understand that this wasn't a negotiation he was going to win with money and intimidation. This was something else entirely. 4 days until they would come to my door, screaming, desperate. 4 days until everything changed. But first, lunch with my father-in-law. First, the opening move in a game I was only now learning I'd been playing all along. I looked out my office window, at the darkness outside, at the streetlights casting their amber glow on empty sidewalks, and I thought about foundations, how you build them deep and strong, how you reinforce them against stress, how you know when one is failing and needs to be abandoned. And how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something you've invested everything in, because staying would only mean going down with it when it finally collapses. The sun would rise in a few hours. Thomas would make his offer, and I would begin the careful, deliberate process of showing them all exactly what they'd underestimated. But for now, in the darkness, I allowed myself one moment of mourning for the marriage I'd thought I had, the family I'd thought I'd joined, the life I'd thought we were building together. One moment of grief for the man I'd been, who'd believed that love and effort and persistence were enough. And then I closed that door, locked it behind me, and turned toward whatever came next, with eyes finally completely open. I arrived at Riverside Grill 15 minutes early. Not because I was nervous, though my heart was beating faster than normal, my hands carrying a slight tremor I had to consciously still, but because I wanted to choose my seat. Positioned myself with my back to the wall, facing the entrance, so I could watch Thomas arrive, could see his face before he composed it into whatever mask he'd decided to wear for this meeting. The restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd, business people in suits, ladies who lunch picking at salads, the ambient noise of silverware and conversation, creating a buffer of normalcy around what I knew would be anything but a normal conversation. I ordered water with lemon and sat back to wait, my phone in my pocket containing copies of every document I might need, my tablet in my bag with spreadsheets and screenshots organized into folders labeled with clinical precision. Thomas arrived exactly on time. I watched him enter the restaurant with the confidence of a man who'd never been made to wait for anything, never been denied access, never heard the word no in any meaningful way. He was tall, taller than I'd remembered, or maybe I'd just grown used to feeling small around Sarah's family. His suit was expensive, custom-tailored, the kind that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. He scanned the room, found me, and his face arranged itself into an expression of paternal concern. He crossed to my table with his hand extended. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, his grip firm, practiced, the handshake of a man who'd closed deals worth millions with this same gesture. "Thomas." We sat. The server appeared immediately. Thomas had that effect, commanded attention without asking for it, and he ordered a scotch. Neat, despite it being noon on a Wednesday. Power move, I noted. Establishing that he operated by different rules, that conventions didn't apply to him. "How are you holding up?" he asked once the server left, and his tone was almost convincing, almost genuine. The concern of a father for his daughter's husband, rather than a CEO preparing to handle a problem. "I'm fine. I'm fine. This situation with Sarah, it's unfortunate. Marriage is difficult. I know that better than most." He smiled, a flash of teeth that was supposed to be disarming. "Martha and I have had our rough patches over the years, but we worked through them with patience and understanding, and frankly, the willingness to compromise." I said nothing. Let him fill the silence. I'd learned that technique from years of client meetings, from architects who understood that silence made people uncomfortable enough to reveal things they hadn't meant to say. "The thing is," Thomas continued, leaning back as the server delivered his scotch, "Sarah's going through a difficult time right now. She's confused, emotional. You know how she can be." I knew, but I wondered what he thought I knew. What version of Sarah he imagined I'd been living with. And when people are emotional, they sometimes say things they don't mean, do things that, in hindsight, they regret. He took a sip of his scotch, watching me over the rim of his glass. "I understand you've discovered some communications, some documents, and I imagine that's upset you." "Communications and documents," I repeated. "That's an interesting way to describe years of lies." His face flickered just for a moment, a crack in the facade. "I think lies is a strong word. Miscommunications, perhaps. Misunderstandings. A journal full of fabricated arguments isn't a miscommunication. Credit card debt hidden for years isn't a misunderstanding. Consulting a divorce lawyer while telling me everything is fine isn't a mistake. These are deliberate, calculated deceptions. You went through her private things. She went through our marriage with an exit strategy. I'd say we're past worrying about privacy." Thomas set down his glass with careful precision. "All right, cards on the table then. Yes, Sarah's been unhappy. Yes, she's been considering leaving. And yes, we've been helping her prepare for that eventuality. That's what families do. They protect their own. By building a case based on lies, by making sure she's protected if things end badly, which, let's be honest, they have. This marriage is over. We both know it. The only question now is how messy the ending will be. I felt something cold settle into my spine. This was it then. The real conversation. The mask dropping to reveal what had always been underneath. So let's talk about that, Thomas continued. Let's talk about how we can make this ending as painless as possible for everyone involved. I'm listening. He smiled, and this time, it had teeth. Real teeth. Good. That's good. Because I'm prepared to be very generous. More generous than you'd get in court. Certainly more generous than you'd have any right to expect, given the circumstances. What circumstances? Let's not play games. You've been out of work for months. You've been living off Sarah's income while you've been, what's the term you use? Finding yourself? Building a freelance career? He said it like the words tasted bad. Meanwhile, Sarah has been supporting both of you, maintaining the household, trying to keep things together while you've been floating from project to project. That's not body. I'm not finished. His voice hardened. Now, the house. Technically, it's in both your names, but we both know Sarah's the reason you could afford it in the first place. Her income qualified you for the mortgage. Her financial stability made the bank confident enough to approve the loan. Without her, you'd still be renting some apartment somewhere, struggling to make ends meet. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands curl into fists under the table, but I kept my voice level. The down payment was mine, $75,000 from my savings. Sarah contributed nothing. A gift, Thomas said smoothly. From what I understand, your contribution to the marriage, which Sarah graciously accepted, that's not what happened. Isn't it? Do you have documentation that says otherwise? A contract? An agreement in writing that specifies that payment as a loan or an investment requiring repayment? He leaned forward. Because without that, it's just your word against hers. And in a court, where she'll have character witnesses, her family, her friends, her colleagues, all testifying to her integrity and your instability. Whose word do you think will carry more weight? This was the intimidation Sarah had warned me about. The systematic dismantling of my position, the rewriting of history, the deployment of resources I couldn't match. He was showing me the machine I'd be fighting against if I didn't accept his offer. So, here's what I'm proposing, Thomas said. A clean break. You walk away from the house, we'll handle selling it, splitting the proceeds according to what we determine is fair. You walk away from any claim to Sarah's future earnings or assets. You sign a non-disclosure agreement stating you won't discuss the details of your marriage or divorce with anyone, no social media posts, no talking to mutual friends, no airing of grievances. And in exchange, I'll write you a check for $100,000. The number hung in the air between us. $100,000. More money than I'd ever had at one time. Enough to start over, to relocate, to build a new life somewhere far from all of this. That's a generous offer. Thomas continued. More than generous. It's enough to get you back on your feet. Start fresh. Put this all behind you. All you have to do is sign some papers and walk away. I looked at him sitting there in his expensive suit, with his expensive scotch, making his expensive offer, and I felt something clarify in me. A decision crystallizing into certainty. No. He blinked. No? No. I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly. You're offering me money to disappear, to let Sarah rewrite history, to allow all of you to pretend that I was the problem, the failure, the burden that needed to be shed. You're buying my silence, so you can tell whatever story you want about why this marriage ended. That's not, and you're threatening me. Very subtly, very professionally, but threatening nonetheless. Talking about court battles and character witnesses and how my word won't stand up against your family's resources. Trying to make me afraid of what will happen if I don't take your money and go away quietly. Thomas's face had gone hard. I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to help yourself. To help Sarah. To make this problem me go away as cheaply and cleanly as possible. But here's what you're not understanding, Thomas. I'm not a problem that can be solved with money. Everyone has a price. Do they? I pulled out my tablet, set it on the table between us. Let me show you something. I opened the first folder, bank statements, color-coded, showing every deposit and withdrawal for the past 7 years. This is documentation of every financial contribution to our marriage. Green is mine. Blue is Sarah's. Notice anything? Thomas glanced at the screen, and I saw his jaw tighten. That's right, I continued. I've paid for approximately 72% of every shared expense we've had. The down payment on the house, 100% mine. Mortgage payments, I've contributed $147,000 to Sarah's $63,000. Home improvements, repairs, utilities, all documented, all showing that I've been the primary financial contributor to our marriage. That doesn't. I'm not finished. I swiped to the next folder. This is Sarah's hidden credit card. $47,000 in debt accumulated over 3 years. Purchases at department stores, spas, restaurants, all while she was telling the divorce lawyer she consulted 6 months ago that she was supporting both of us. Thomas's face had gone pale. You have no right to access her private financial. We're married. Married people share financial information, or they're supposed to, unless one of them is hiding debt and lying about their spending. I swiped again. This is the family trust documentation I found in her office. The one that pays out $425,000 in the event of divorce. The one that was modified 2 years ago to include that provision. Tell me, Thomas, did you help structure that? Was that your idea? To incentivize her to leave me? His silence was answer enough. And this, I said, opening the final folder, is my personal favorite. Sarah's journal. The one you and Martha encouraged her to keep. The one full of documented arguments that never happened, financial struggles that were invented, instances of my neglect that are complete fiction. Let me read you an entry. April 3rd. He forgot our anniversary again. Except our anniversary is April 8th, and I didn't forget it. I took her to dinner, gave her a bracelet, made reservations weeks in advance. She wrote this entry 5 days before the anniversary happened, documenting a failure that never occurred. I looked up at him, watched him processing this. So you see, Thomas, I don't just have my word against hers. I have documentation, evidence, proof that your daughter has been systematically lying, not just to me, but in legal documents she was preparing to use in court. That's not miscommunication. That's fraud. The silence stretched between us. Around us, the restaurant continued its normal rhythm conversations, laughter, the clink of glasses. But at our table, everything had stopped. Thomas stared at the tablet, then at me, and I watched him recalculate. Watched him realize that the equation he'd walked in with had changed completely. What do you want? He asked finally. I want the truth. I want Sarah to admit what she's done. I want your family to acknowledge that I wasn't the problem you all decided I was. And I want a divorce settlement that reflects reality, not the fiction you've been constructing. That's not going to happen. Then we go to court. And all of this, I gestured to the tablet, becomes public record. Sarah's lies, the manufactured evidence. The family trust structured to reward her for leaving me. Your involvement in coaching her on how to build a false case? All of it. You're threatening me. I'm giving you information. What you choose to do with it is up to you. I closed the tablet, slid it back into my bag. You came here thinking I was weak, thinking I was desperate enough to take your money and disappear, that I was the same man who sat at your wife's Christmas table and accepted humiliation with a smile. But I'm not that man anymore. You all made sure of that. Thomas finished his scotch in one swallow, his hand not quite steady. If you take this to court, it will get ugly. It's already ugly. The question is whether you want that ugliness exposed publicly, or whether you want to settle this privately with something approaching honesty. What are your terms? I keep the house. Sarah walks away from any claim to it, since she contributed essentially nothing to its purchase or maintenance. She takes her debt with her, all of it. The credit cards, the student loans, everything, in her name alone. We split the joint savings account 50-50, which amounts to about $12,000. And she admits, in writing, that the journal was falsified, that she lied about our financial situation to her lawyer and her family, that I was not the failure she's been painting me as. She'll never agree to that. Then she can explain to a judge why she kept a journal full of documented lies, why she hid massive debt while claiming to support us both, why she consulted a divorce lawyer while telling me everything was fine, and I'll make sure every piece of evidence I have is submitted to the court, becomes part of the public record, gets picked up by anyone who might be interested in a story about a wealthy family trying to defraud someone in a divorce. Thomas stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Several nearby diners glanced over, and I saw him force himself to compose his face, to lower his voice. You're making a mistake. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The resources we have, the people we know. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. I've spent 7 years studying your family, learning how you operate, watching you deploy your money and your connections and your casual cruelty against anyone who doesn't fit your standards. But here's what you don't know about me. I'm very, very good at documentation. I'm very good at patience. And I'm very good at building cases that can withstand pressure. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It's not. You have 3 days to discuss my terms with Sarah, to decide whether you want to settle this quietly and honestly, or whether you want everything exposed in court. After that, I file for divorce myself, and everything I have gets submitted as evidence. 3 days? That's not enough time. It's plenty of time. And Thomas, don't bother trying to intimidate me further. Don't have your lawyers send threatening letters. Don't try to access my bank accounts or credit. I've already moved everything to accounts Sarah and your family have no access to. I've made backups of all my evidence and stored them with people you'll never find. And I've documented this conversation. I gestured to my phone, sitting on the table between us, its screen dark but recording. Every threat, every admission, every word. So let's both be very careful about what happens next. His face had gone from pale to red, anger finally breaking through his carefully maintained control. You son of a... 3 days, I repeated calmly. Tell Sarah, tell Martha, tell your lawyers. 3 days to decide whether truth or consequences serves you better. I stood up, pulled out my wallet, left $40 on the table for my water and the meal I had no intention of staying to eat. Then I walked out of that restaurant with my back straight and my head high, feeling Thomas's stare boring into me the whole way. Outside, the December sun was bright and cold. I walked to my car, got in, and sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, adrenaline finally catching up to me in shaking hands and rapid heartbeat. I'd done it. I'd faced Thomas Richardson, patriarch of the family that had dismissed me for years, and I'd shown him that I wasn't what they thought I was, wasn't weak, wasn't desperate, wasn't someone who could be bought or intimidated into silence. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Unknown. You're going to regret this. I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. They could threaten all they wanted, could deploy their lawyers and their money and their social connections. But I had something they didn't. The truth, documented in irrefutable detail, ready to be deployed the moment they tried to rewrite history one more time. 3 days until I filed for divorce. 3 days until they would have to decide whether to accept my terms or face everything being exposed. 3 days until they came to my door, desperate and screaming. But I already knew which choice they'd make. People like Thomas Richardson didn't accept terms, didn't admit defeat, didn't acknowledge when they'd been outmaneuvered. They fought. They escalated. They tried to destroy anyone who dared to challenge them. And when they did, I'd be ready. I started the car and drove home through streets decorated with post-Christmas cheer, lights still twinkling in windows, wreaths still hanging on doors. The world continuing its normal rhythms, while my life underwent tectonic shifts. But I felt oddly calm, strangely at peace. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to be someone I wasn't. Wasn't trying to fit into spaces too small for me. Wasn't apologizing for taking up room in my own life.
I was just myself, with evidence and documentation and the quiet power of someone who'd stopped accepting cruelty as the price of belonging.
And 3 days from now, they'd all understand exactly what that meant. The first response came 6 hours after my lunch with Thomas. Not from him, not from Sarah, but from a lawyer. I was working on the warehouse conversion project, lost in the clean geometry of floor plans and load calculations, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, telemarketer, probably, or some robocall about my car's extended warranty, but something made me pick up. "This is David Chen, from Morrison, Walsh & Associates," the voice said, crisp and professional. "I represent the Richardson family in personal matters. I'm calling regarding your marriage to Sarah Richardson and certain allegations that have been made." I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "I haven't made any allegations. I've simply documented facts." "Yes, well," he cleared his throat. "I've been retained to inform you that any documents you may have obtained through illegal means, breaking and entering, theft, unauthorized access to private communications cannot be used in legal proceedings and could subject you to criminal prosecution. I haven't broken into anything. The documents I have were located in my own house, which I own, in spaces I have every legal right to access. And the communications were on devices to which I had authorized access. But thank you for the concern. Mister?" He paused, and I realized with a dark humor that he didn't even know my name. Thomas had hired a lawyer to intimidate me without bothering to provide basic identifying information. "Richardson," I said. "Same as my wife. For now." "Mr. Richardson, my clients are willing to be reasonable, but they require assurances that certain private matters will remain private. I'm prepared to draft a settlement agreement that's mutually beneficial." I gave Thomas my terms, 3 days to accept them or I file for divorce and everything becomes public record. That offer stands. That's not how this works. You can't dictate terms to... Actually, I can, because I have documentation, Mr. Chen, extensive documentation. And unless your clients want that documentation examined by a judge, they'll accept my terms or negotiate in good faith. What they won't do is intimidate me into silence or pay me to disappear. You're making a serious mistake. People keep telling me that. But the only mistake I made was spending 7 years trying to be good enough for people who'd already decided I wasn't. That mistake? I've corrected it. Now, was there anything else? He was quiet for a moment. My clients will be in touch. They have 72 hours. I hung up before he could respond, my heart racing. This was their first move, deploy the lawyers, try to scare me with legal threats, make me doubt whether my evidence was actually admissible or whether I'd broken laws by obtaining it. Classic intimidation, the kind Thomas probably used on contractors and business rivals. But I'd anticipated this. Had already consulted with my own lawyer, a woman named Patricia Vance, who specialized in complex divorces and who'd spent 2 hours reviewing my evidence before telling me, in no uncertain terms, that I had one of the most well-documented cases she'd ever seen. "They're going to try to bury you in procedure," she'd warned. "Make you spend money you don't have on legal fees. Drag things out until you're exhausted. But if you're willing to fight, and I mean really fight, you'll win. The evidence is too clear." I'd paid her retainer with money I'd carefully saved, money I'd moved to an account Sarah didn't know about. Patricia had drawn up papers, prepared counter-arguments, built a legal strategy that would deploy my evidence in the most damaging way possible if we ended up in court. But I didn't want court. Not really. I wanted acknowledgement, admission, the truth spoken out loud by people who'd built their lives on carefully constructed lies. The second response came that evening. A series of texts, rapid fire, from Jennifer. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You can't threaten my family." Sarah is devastated. "You're being vindictive and cruel. We gave you everything, Capiter. You were nothing before Sarah, a nobody-er-ess. And this is how you repay her kindness?" I read through them, each message, a small window into how they saw me, how they'd always seen me. Nothing, nobody, Someone who should be grateful for their kindness, their tolerance, their willingness to let me exist in their orbit. I screenshotted every message, added them to a folder labeled harassment. Then I responded with a single text. Have Sarah call me if she wants to discuss settlement terms. Otherwise, I'll see you all in court. You fucking asshole. We'll destroy you. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Daddy has lawyers who eat people like you for breakfast. You're going to end up with nothing. Worse than nothing. We'll make sure everyone knows what a pathetic gold-digging loser you are. I screenshot those two. Let her rage. Let her threaten. Every message was more evidence of their true character, more ammunition if this went to court. The mask was slipping, and I was documenting every moment of the fall. My phone rang. Marcus, my brother this time, not Sarah's brother-in-law. Tell me you're not caving, he said without preamble. I'm not caving. Good, because Jennifer just called me. Actually called me, which is hilarious since she's never bothered to speak to me before. Tried to tell me I needed to talk sense into you before you ruined your life. What did you say? I told her my brother was the most sensible person I knew, and that maybe she should worry about her own family's choices. Then she called me an enabler and hung up. He laughed, but there was an edge to it. They're panicking. You've got them scared. Good. But be careful. Scared people do desperate things. And people with money and connections, they can do a lot of damage when they're desperate. I know. I'm ready. Are you though? Really? His voice softened. Because this is going to get uglier before it gets better. They're going to come at you with everything they have, and you're going to be alone in that house, dealing with all of it, and I'm 3,000 miles away. I'm not alone, I said, and I meant it. I had Patricia. I had my documentation. I had the truth. And I'm not the same person I was at that Christmas dinner. I'm not going to fold because they yell at me, or threaten me, or try to make me feel small. I've spent 7 years feeling small. I'm done with that. Okay, he exhaled. Okay, but call me if you need anything. Day or night. I mean it. I will. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my house and felt the weight of what I was doing settle over me. This wasn't just ending a marriage. This was declaring war on a family that had never seen me as anything but a temporary inconvenience. And wars, even righteous ones, came with casualties. But I'd already been a casualty of their casual cruelty, already been diminished and dismissed and erased. The only difference now was that I was fighting back. Day 2 of the countdown brought more escalation. I woke to find my car had been keyed long, deliberate scratches down both sides, the kind of vandalism that spoke of rage rather than random violence. I photographed it, filed a police report, added it to my documentation. Then came the email from my largest client, the one whose warehouse conversion project was paying my bills. Subject, project concerns. Dear Mr. Richardson, we've been made aware of some personal issues you're dealing with that may impact your ability to complete our project professionally and on schedule. While we appreciate the work you've done thus far, we feel it's best to part ways at this time. Please send us a final invoice for work completed, and we'll arrange for another architect to take over. Best regards. I stared at that email, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood. They'd gotten to my clients. Someone, Thomas, probably with his business connections and his network of favors owed, had reached out to my largest source of income and convinced them I was unstable. I called Patricia immediately. That's tortious interference, she said after I read her the email. If we can prove the Richardsons contacted your client with the intent to damage your business relationships, we can add it to the suit. Document everything. Save that email. Get a statement from the client if possible about who contacted them. Will that help? It shows a pattern of harassment, of using their resources to punish you for not capitulating. Yes, it helps. But more importantly, it proves you right about who they are. I sent a carefully worded response to the client, professional and brief, asking who had raised concerns about my work. They didn't respond, but I'd expected that. People with Thomas Richardson's connections didn't get their hands dirty in ways that left evidence. By afternoon, My phone was flooded with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I answered the first few reporters, somehow alerted to a contentious divorce involving a prominent local family. I hung up on all of them, blocked the numbers, and watched with grim fascination as more kept coming. They were trying to make this public, trying to control the narrative before I could. Plant stories about a bitter ex-husband making wild accusations, a troubled man lashing out at his successful wife's family, get ahead of the truth with a carefully crafted lie. I called Patricia again. "Don't talk to any reporters," she instructed. "Not a word. Anything you say can and will be twisted. Let them speculate. Let the Richardsons try to spin this. Because when we go to court, if we go to court, the truth will be in the official record and all their PR spin won't matter. They're trying to destroy my reputation before we even get there." Of course they are. That's what people with money do when they can't win on the merits. They try to win in the court of public opinion instead. But you have something they don't. What's that? Documentation, evidence, the truth. And in a courtroom, that matters more than money. She paused. Most of the time anyway. That qualified optimism should have discouraged me. Instead, it steadied me. Because she wasn't lying to me, wasn't promising easy victory. She was treating me like an adult who could handle reality, something Sarah and her family had never done. That evening, I got a call from Sarah, her first direct contact since she'd gone to her mother's. "Please," she said, and her voice was raw, stripped of pretense. "Please stop this. You're destroying everything." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to let you destroy me quietly. That's not what I was doing." Yes, it was. The journal, Sarah. The fabricated evidence. The lawyer consultations. The family trust, structured to pay out when you divorced me. All of it was systematic destruction. You were just hoping I'd never notice. I was scared. Of what? Of being trapped. Of making a mistake I couldn't undo. She choked on a sob. Of ending up like my mother, in a marriage where I was just settled, where I'd compromised myself into someone I didn't recognize. There was something almost honest in that admission, almost vulnerable. And a part of me, the part that had loved her, that maybe still loved the ghost of who she'd been wanted to soften. Wanted to say we could work this out, find some middle ground, salvage something from the wreckage. But then I remembered sitting at that Christmas table. Remembered, "Be grateful you can sit here," and the laughter that followed. Remembered the journal entries documenting failures that never happened. Remembered 7 years of trying to be enough for someone who'd already decided I wasn't. "You could have just left," I said quietly. "You could have said you were unhappy, that the marriage wasn't working, that you'd made a mistake." I would have been hurt, but I would have understood. We could have divorced like adults, split things fairly, moved on with our lives. I tried to tell you. No, you didn't. You built a case against me instead. You lied to your family, to your lawyer, to yourself, about who I was and what this marriage was. You didn't try to fix things or end things honestly. You tried to rewrite history so thoroughly that you could leave with everyone's blessing and half of everything I'd built and the moral high ground to boot. Daddy said you're asking for the house, that you want me to admit I lied, that you want—" She was crying now, hard enough that the words came out broken, "that you want to humiliate me the way you feel humiliated." I don't want to humiliate you, Sarah. I want the truth. I want you to admit what you've done. And I want a divorce settlement that reflects reality, not the fiction you've been constructing. And if I can't do that, then we go to court, and everything the journal, the trust fund, the hidden debt, the manufactured evidence, all of it becomes public record, gets examined by a judge, gets reported by all those journalists who've been calling me today fishing for a story. You wouldn't. I would. Because the alternative is letting you and your family destroy me, while claiming I destroyed myself, and I'm done being destroyed quietly. She was silent for a long moment. How did you become so cruel? The question landed like a punch. Cruel? You think I'm the one being cruel? You used to be kind, gentle. You used to love me. I did love you. But you can't love someone who's been lying to you for years. You can only love the illusion they presented. And once you see through that illusion, I trailed off. I'm not being cruel, Sarah. I'm being honest for the first time in this marriage. And if honesty feels like cruelty to you, maybe that says more about what you're used to than about what I'm doing. I can't give you what you want. Can't or won't. Does it matter? It does. Because can't means you're still lying to yourself about what you've done. Won't means you know the truth, but you're choosing to protect yourself rather than do the right thing. The right thing, she repeated bitterly, according to you. According to reality. According to documents and bank statements and screenshots of conversations. According to a journal full of lies written in your handwriting. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there holding the phone, feeling the weight of that conversation settle over me like ash. 24 hours left until my deadline expired. 24 hours for them to accept my terms or force this into court. 24 hours before everything changed irrevocably. I pulled out my tablet, reviewed my evidence one more time. Every document in order, every screenshot dated and backed up, every piece of the puzzle fitting together into a picture so clear that no amount of money or legal maneuvering could obscure it. If they wanted war, I had ammunition. If they wanted peace, I had terms. But what I wouldn't give them, what I'd never give them again, was silence. The grateful, diminished silence of someone who believed he deserved to be treated as less than. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, listening to the house settle around me, to the wind rattling the windows, to the sound of my own heartbeat steady and strong in my ears. Tomorrow they would decide, accept my terms and admit their lies, or reject them and face exposure in court. I knew which they'd choose. People like the Richardsons didn't admit defeat, didn't acknowledge mistakes, didn't apologize to people they considered beneath them. They'd reject my terms, probably already had. And then they'd come not with acceptance, but with one final attempt to intimidate me, to make me understand what I was risking by defying them, to show me the full weight of their power and convince me that resistance was futile. They'd come to my door, screaming, desperate, furious, that I dared to challenge them. And I'd be ready, because I'd spent days preparing for this moment, had documented everything, backed it up everywhere, built a case so solid that no amount of legal brilliance could dismantle it, had steeled myself against their threats, and their rage, and their attempts to make me feel small. I wasn't small, wasn't nothing, wasn't nobody. I was the man who'd paid for the house they were trying to take, who'd supported a wife who claimed she was supporting him, who'd endured years of casual cruelty with dignity and patience. And now I was the man who documented every lie, every betrayal, every moment of their systematic campaign to erase him, the man who was done being erased. Tomorrow, they'd understand that. Tomorrow, when they came to my door with their threats and their rage and their desperate final gambit, they'd discover that the person they'd been dismissing for years had been paying much closer attention than they'd ever imagined. I closed my eyes and thought about foundations, how you reinforced them, how you tested their strength, how you knew when they could bear weight and when they needed to be abandoned. My foundation was solid now, built on truth instead of compromise, on self-respect instead of the desperate desire to belong. And when they came tomorrow, they'd find that foundation couldn't be shaken. Not by money, not by threats, not by the full force of their fury and their wounded privilege. I'd survived their casual cruelty. I'd survived their deliberate war. And on the other side of it, I'd build something new, something honest, something that didn't require me to disappear in order to exist. The wind picked up outside, and somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. The world continuing its normal chaos while I lay in the dark, counting down to the moment everything would change. 1 day left, 24 hours, and then they'd come. The morning of day 3 arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only comes after winter storms. The sky was impossibly blue, the sun sharp and cold, and the world looked newly made, scrubbed clean by wind and snow and the passage of something momentous. I woke at 6. Made coffee with the methodical precision of someone performing a ritual. Each step deliberate. Measure the grounds. Heat the water to exactly 200 degrees. Pour in slow circles. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and dark, and I stood at the counter watching steam rise from the cup while the sun climbed over the neighbor's roof. Today was the day. The deadline I'd given them had expired at midnight. They hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't sent their lawyer back with revised terms or acceptance of mine, which meant they'd made their choice. Reject my offer, try to outlast me, assume I'd fold under pressure. They'd miscalculated. At 7, I opened my laptop and logged into the court's electronic filing system. Patricia had prepared all the documents, reviewed them 3 times, made sure every detail was correct. Now all that remained was pressing submit. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner, my full legal name. Respondent, Sarah Marie Richardson. I scrolled through the attachments. 47 separate exhibits, each one a piece of evidence documenting the truth of our marriage. Financial records showing my contributions versus hers. Screenshots of the text messages between Sarah and her family. Photographs of the fabricated journal entries. Bank statements for the hidden credit card. The trust fund documents. The consultation notes from her divorce lawyer dated 6 months before I knew anything was wrong. Everything. All of it. Organized with the precision of someone who'd spent years reading blueprints and understanding that details mattered, that measurements had to be exact, that structural integrity depended on getting every calculation right. My finger hovered over the submit button. This was the point of no return. Once I filed these papers, once these documents entered the court system, they became public record. Anyone could access them. The reporters who'd been calling would have their story, not the one the Richardsons wanted to tell, but the real one, backed by documentation they couldn't dispute. I thought about Sarah, about the woman I'd married, full of promise and laughter, before disappointment had curdled into contempt. About the nights we'd stayed up late talking about our future, about the children we'd have someday, about growing old together. About the moment I couldn't pinpoint it exactly, could only feel its absence when she'd stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as a problem. I thought about Martha and her casual cruelty, about Thomas and his assumption that every problem could be solved with money, about Jennifer and her smug superiority, about sitting at that Christmas table, watching everyone receive their gifts, feeling my own invisibility settle over me like a shroud. I thought about the man I'd been then grateful just to be included, apologetic for existing, making himself smaller and smaller in the hope that if he took up less space, they might finally let him stay. And I thought about the man I'd become, the one who'd stopped apologizing, stopped shrinking, stopped accepting cruelty as the price of belonging. I pressed submit. The screen flashed. Filing successful. Case number XXXXXXX. Court date January 30th, 2026. It was done. Irrevocable. Real. I sat back in my chair and felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph, exactly. Not joy. Just a quiet certainty that I'd done what needed doing, that I'd stopped being complicit in my own erasure. My phone rang almost immediately. Patricia, I see it's filed, she said, and I could hear the approval in her voice. How are you feeling? Steady. Good, because they're going to lose their minds when they find out. Probably within the hour, the system sends automatic notification to all parties. She paused. Make sure your phone is charged. Make sure your doors are locked. And don't, I repeat, don't engage with them if they show up. Anything you say can be used against you. Anything they say to you, record it if possible. I understand. You've done the right thing. The hard thing, but the right thing. Now we let the legal process work. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen and waited. The notification would go out any minute. Sarah would receive it on her phone, wherever she was, probably still at her mother's, probably still surrounded by her family, probably still believing they could intimidate me into silence. And then they'd know, would see the case number, the attachments, the 47 exhibits documenting their lies, would understand that I hadn't been bluffing, hadn't been posturing, had meant every word I'd said. 20 minutes later, My phone started buzzing. Not ringing, they'd learned I wouldn't answer their calls, but texts, dozens of them, flooding in, one after another. What did you do to -7? HO, could you see? You filed? We filed? With all of that chapped. Those are private documents to Margan 9. You had no right to. You're going to regret this. Seriously regret this, S. Daddy's lawyers are already looking at everything. They're going to destroy you when. This is unconscionable. Airing private family matters in public court. You should be ashamed of yourself. Unknown. This is David Chen. We need to speak immediately about your filing. You've made serious allegations that could constitute defamation. Call my office within the hour. I screenshot every message, added them to my documentation folder, now labeled post-filing harassment. Let them threaten, let them rage. Every word was more evidence of their character, more proof that my characterization of them had been accurate. I didn't respond to any of them, just watched the messages pour in, each one more desperate than the last, and felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. They were panicking. They thought I wouldn't actually do it, would fold at the last minute, would accept their terms or disappear quietly. But I'd done exactly what I said I would do, and now they were scrambling, trying to figure out how to contain damage they'd convinced themselves would never materialize. By noon, the messages had stopped. An eerie silence fell over my phone, and I knew what that meant. They were regrouping, strategizing, preparing their response. The initial panic was over. Now came the calculated counterattack. I spent the afternoon working on the smaller projects. I still had a residential addition, a kitchen renovation consultation. Normal work for normal clients who had no idea their architect was currently engaged in a legal war with his soon-to-be ex-wife's wealthy family. The work was grounding, familiar, a reminder that life existed outside this conflict. Around 3, I heard a car pull into my driveway, then another, then a third. I looked out the window and felt my pulse quicken. Thomas's Mercedes, Martha's Lexus, Sarah's BMW. All 3 parked in front of my house like an invasion force, doors opening simultaneously, the family emerging with synchronized purpose. They'd come, just as I'd known they would, not to accept my terms, not to apologize, but to make one final attempt to intimidate me into submission. I pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app, and pressed record. The doorbell rang. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Then the pounding started. Fists against wood, sharp and aggressive. "Open up!" Thomas's voice, loud enough to carry through the door. "We need to talk!" More pounding. I watched through the peephole as they stood there, Thomas red-faced and angry. Martha perfectly composed but with fury in her eyes. Sarah crying. Jennifer with her arms crossed, looking like she wanted to break something. "We know you're in there," Jennifer shouted. "We saw your car. Please!" Sarah's voice cracked. "Please! We need to talk about this. You can't do this." I stayed silent. Let them pound. Let them shout. Every word recorded, every moment documented. "Open this goddamn door!" Thomas again, his voice rising. "You think you can hide in there? You think filing papers makes you untouchable?" "We have lawyers," Jennifer added. "We have resources. You're going to lose everything." "Please," Martha said, and her voice was different, controlled, careful, the tone of someone making a calculated appeal. "Please, be reasonable. Let's discuss this like adults. Whatever grievances you have, whatever you think has happened, we can resolve this privately. There's no need for courts and public records and all this ugliness." I almost laughed. Ugliness. As if the ugliness hadn't been there all along, carefully hidden beneath expensive clothes and perfect manners, and Christmas dinners where some people got gifts and others got reminded of their place. "I'll double the offer," Thomas called out. 200,000. Cash. Clean break, you walk away, we handle everything else. That's more than generous. More than you'd get in court. Silence. I waited to see if there was more. "Please," Sarah said, her voice small now, broken. "Please open the door. I just want to talk to you. I just want to understand why you're doing this." why I was doing this, as if the reasons weren't documented in 47 exhibits currently filed with the court, as if years of their dismissal and deception weren't reason enough. $300,000, Thomas said. Final offer. More money than you've ever had. More than you'll make in 5 years. Take it and end this before it destroys all of us. Before it destroys you, you mean? I said quietly, speaking for the first time, though not loud enough for them to hear, through the door. But my phone caught it, recorded it, timestamp and all. The pounding continued, harder now, more desperate. I could hear the frustration in it, the disbelief that I wasn't opening the door, wasn't engaging, wasn't giving them the confrontation they'd come prepared for. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," Jennifer shouted. "You're nobody. You came from nothing. And without Sarah, without this family, you'll go back to nothing." "Jennifer, enough," Martha said sharply. Then, louder, "We're not leaving until you speak with us. We'll stay here all night if we have to. The neighbors are already watching. Is this really how you want this to look? Us outside? You hiding? What will people think?" What will people think? Always concerned with appearances, with how things looked, with maintaining the carefully constructed image of a perfect family. Never mind what was true, only what seemed true to observers. I pulled out my laptop, opened the case file, and sent Patricia a message. They're at my door, all of them, making threats and trying to bribe me. Everything recorded. Her response was immediate. "Don't engage. Call the police if they don't leave. This is harassment." I looked through the peephole again. They were arguing among themselves now, Thomas gesturing angrily, Martha trying to calm him, Jennifer on her phone probably calling their lawyer, Sarah just standing there crying. They looked desperate, unmoored, like people who'd always controlled their environment, suddenly discovering that control was an illusion, that power had limits, that money couldn't fix everything. "Last chance!" Thomas shouted. "Open this door and let's settle this like reasonable people, or I swear to God, we'll make you regret ever meeting my daughter." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" "There are people at my door refusing to leave. They're pounding on the door, shouting threats. I've asked them to leave, and they won't." "What's your address?" I gave it. Heard the operator typing. "Officers are en route. Are you in immediate danger?" "No. I'm inside. They're outside. But they're aggressive, and I'm concerned about—" A crash, the sound of glass breaking. I whipped around to see a rock lying on my living room floor, surrounded by shattered window glass. Cold air poured through the hole, and I heard Jennifer's voice. "If you won't open the door, we'll come in anyway." "They just broke my window," I told the operator, my voice surprisingly calm despite my racing heart. "They're trying to force their way in. Officers are 2 minutes away. Stay on the line, get to a safe room and lock the door if possible." I moved to my office, locked the door, kept my phone recording. Could hear them outside, arguing again, Sarah's voice raised. "What are you doing? That's destruction of property. That's—" "Shut up," Jennifer snapped. "You wanted him to talk to us. Well, now he has to." But they didn't come through the window. I heard Martha's voice, sharp and commanding. "Stop, both of you. The neighbors are watching. This has gone too far." "He needs to understand," Thomas started. "The police are probably coming," Martha interrupted. "We need to leave. Now. But. Now. Thomas." Silence. Then, footsteps. Car doors opening. Engines starting. The sound of them leaving. Tires on pavement. Fading into the distance. I stayed in my office, phone still recording, until I heard the sirens. Watched through my window as 2 police cars pulled up, officers getting out, examining the broken window, knocking on my door. I let them in, showed them the damage, played them the recording of the threats and the sound of the window breaking, gave them names and descriptions. "Do you want to press charges?" one officer asked. "Notebook out." "Yes. For destruction of property and harassment." He wrote it down. "Do you have any idea why they were here?" "We're in the middle of a divorce," I said. "I filed papers this morning. I think they were trying to intimidate me into dropping the case. The officers exchanged a look. "We'll file a report," the second one said. "Might want to get a restraining order if they keep this up, and definitely get that window fixed before tonight, supposed to drop below freezing." After they left, I stood in my living room, looking at the broken glass scattered across the floor, glinting in the afternoon light. This was what desperation looked like. What happened when people used to getting their way suddenly discovered they couldn't bully or buy their way out of consequences? I took photos of the damage, added them to my documentation, called a glass repair service that promised emergency same-day service. Then, I called Patricia. "They broke your window?" She sounded almost gleeful. "In front of witnesses? With you recording?" Quote, "Doubt him. In front of witnesses." Jennifer threw a rock. "That's assault, property destruction, harassment, criminal mischief. We're adding this to the filing. This is," she paused, "this is actually perfect. They just proved everything you've been saying about their character." It doesn't feel perfect. It feels insane, because it is insane. But it's the kind of insane that works in our favor. They've lost control. They're showing their true colors. And now we have documentation of it. What happens next? They'll get the police report. Their lawyers will see it and probably have coronaries. They'll realize they've massively overplayed their hand. And then if they're smart, they'll come back with acceptance of your original terms, maybe even more favorable terms, to make this go away before it gets worse. And if they're not smart, then we go to court, present all of this evidence, and watch a judge award you everything you asked for and then some. Either way, you win. They just get to choose how painful the winning is. After we hung up, I sat among the broken glass and felt something unexpected. Sadness. Not for myself, but for Sarah, for the woman I'd married who'd somehow become someone capable of standing by while her sister threw rocks through windows. For the marriage that had started with hope and ended with police reports and restraining orders. But underneath the sadness was something stronger: resolution. The certainty that I'd made the right choice, that walking away from people who treated you this way wasn't weakness, it was survival. It was self-respect. It was refusing to participate in your own diminishment. The glass repair service arrived at 5, had the window fixed by 6. I cleaned up the remaining shards, swept and vacuumed until no trace remained except the bill for emergency repairs, which I added to the damages I was claiming in the divorce. As the sun set, turning my living room golden, then gray, then dark, I sat in the quiet and thought about what came next. The court date was set. The evidence was filed. The police report was documented. There was nothing left to do but wait. Wait for their lawyers to review the damage they'd done to their own case. Wait for Sarah and her family to realize that this war they'd started was one they couldn't win. Wait for justice, slow and imperfect and complicated, but justice nonetheless. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. This is Sarah, using Jennifer's phone. "I'm so sorry. About all of it. About everything. I never wanted this. Please call me." I looked at that message for a long time. Thought about calling. About hearing her out. About the part of me that still remembered loving her. Then I deleted it, added the screenshot to my documentation folder, and turned off my phone. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. Some doors, once closed, stay closed. And some people, once they've shown you who they really are, don't deserve the chance to pretend otherwise. The next morning arrived without fanfare. No pounding on doors. No rocks through windows. No flood of threatening messages. Just silence, the kind that follows storms, when the world holds its breath and assesses the damage. I made coffee, repaired a section of drywall near the replaced window, and waited. Patricia had said they'd respond within 48 hours of seeing the police report, that they'd either come back with acceptance of terms or dig in for a protracted legal battle. I was betting on acceptance. People like the Richardsons didn't do well when their carefully constructed images cracked, when police reports and court filings made their private cruelties public, when money couldn't buy back their reputations. The call came at 10:30. Not from Thomas or Sarah, but from David Chen, their lawyer. "Mr. Richardson," he said, and his voice had lost its earlier aggression. "I've reviewed the police report from yesterday's incident. My clients deeply regret the escalation." "Escalation," I repeated. "That's what we're calling property destruction now?" They were emotional. The situation got out of hand. But they're prepared to make amends, to settle this matter quickly and amicably. "On what terms?" "They're willing to accept your original proposal. The house remains yours. Mrs. Richardson assumes her debts. The savings are split 50-50, and she provides a written statement acknowledging certain inaccuracies in her prior documentation." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not victory, this wasn't about winning, but vindication. Recognition that the truth I documented was undeniable. And the criminal charges? The broken window? "Mrs. Richardson's sister will cover all repair costs and issue a formal apology, and they request you consider not pursuing charges, given that—" "No." Silence. "I'm sorry?" "The charges stand. Jennifer broke my window, threatened me. That has consequences." "Mr. Richardson, surely we can be reasonable." "This is me being reasonable. Your clients came to my home, made threats, destroyed my property, tried to intimidate me into silence. The charges are the consequence of their choices, just like this divorce is the consequence of their lies." More silence. Then, "I'll draft the settlement agreement based on your terms. We can have this finalized within a week." "Good." After he hung up, I sat in the quiet of my house, finally and completely mine, and felt the weight of the past weeks lift slightly. Not gone, but lighter, manageable. They'd accepted my terms, admitted their lies, agreed to everything I'd asked for. Not because they wanted to, not because they'd suddenly grown consciences, but because I documented the truth so thoroughly that denial became impossible. Because I'd stopped being grateful just to exist in their presence. Because I'd finally understood that some people only respect you when you refuse to be disrespected. The war was ending, not with a bang, but with a signature on legal documents. And I could finally start rebuilding. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in late January, not in a courtroom drama with raised voices and dramatic revelations, but in a conference room with beige walls and fluorescent lighting. Sarah sat on one side of the table with her lawyer. I sat on the other with Patricia. We signed papers, initialed clauses, agreed to terms that reflected reality rather than the fiction they'd tried to construct. Sarah looked diminished somehow, smaller than I remembered. Her designer clothes and perfect makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes, the defeat in the slope of her shoulders. She didn't look at me once during the entire proceeding, just signed where her lawyer indicated and kept her gaze fixed on the table. The written statement was brief, clinical, stripped of emotion. I, Sarah Marie Richardson, acknowledge that certain journal entries and financial representations made during my marriage were inaccurate. I acknowledge that my former spouse contributed substantially more to our household expenses and property acquisition than I previously represented to legal counsel and family members. I release all claims to the property located at our address and acknowledge it as the sole property of my name. Her signature at the bottom looked shaky, uncertain, nothing like the confident loops and flourishes I remembered from our wedding certificate 7 years ago. When it was done, when all the papers were signed and notarized and filed, Patricia shook my hand. "Congratulations," she said. "You stood your ground and won." But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving, like walking away from a building you'd invested years in constructing, only to discover the foundation had been rotting all along. Sarah left first, her lawyer's hand on her elbow, guiding her out like she might collapse without support. I watched her go and felt nothing but a distant echo of what I'd once felt. The love had died somewhere between Christmas dinner and broken windows. What remained was just memory-faded photographs of a life that had never been quite real. I spent the next week cleaning, not just the house, but my life. I painted over the nail holes where our wedding photos had hung, donated the furniture Sarah had chosen, the couch that had never been comfortable, the dining table where we'd eaten so many silent meals. rearranged rooms to suit my needs rather than her aesthetic. The house transformed, became lighter, more open. I hung my own artwork prints I'd always liked, but she'd said were too common. I bought a comfortable armchair and put it by the window where the light was best. I cooked meals I enjoyed, and ate them without apologizing for my choices. Marcus flew out for a weekend. We sat in my kitchen drinking beer and not talking about Sarah or the divorce or any of it. Just brothers, reconnecting after years of distance. "This place looks good," he said, looking around. "Looks like you." "It's starting to." "You doing okay?" "Really?" I thought about that question, about the sleepless nights and the moments of doubt and the grief that still ambushed me sometimes when I least expected it. But I also thought about the peace I felt in this house now. The ability to breathe without constantly monitoring someone else's mood. The freedom to be myself without apology. "I'm getting there," I said. "It's like rebuilding after demolition. You have to clear away all the rubble before you can start constructing something new. Very architectural of you." I laughed. Force of habit. My business grew. Word spread not about the divorce, but about the quality of my work. Clients who'd heard I was available, who'd been impressed by my portfolio, who needed someone who paid attention to details and delivered on promises. I hired a part-time assistant, started bidding on larger projects, built something sustainable and honest. One evening in March, I was working late when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, still wary of contact from the Richardsons, but something made me open it. "Unknown. This is Jennifer. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For the window. For everything. You were right about all of it. I hope you're doing well." I stared at that message for a long time, thought about responding, about accepting the apology, about extending some gesture of forgiveness. Then I deleted it. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Some apologies come too late. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. Some people are better left in the past. Spring arrived gradually. Then, all at once, the trees outside my window exploded with green. The light changed, softer, warmer, full of possibility. I started taking walks in the evenings, rediscovering the neighborhood I'd lived in but never really inhabited, talking to neighbors I'd nodded at but never known, building a life that was mine, not ours. On a Saturday in April, I drove to the coast, stood on the beach watching waves roll in with their ancient rhythm. The wind was cold, the sand rough under my feet, but the sky was impossibly blue and the horizon stretched forever. I thought about the man I'd been at that Christmas dinner, the one who'd accepted humiliation as the price of belonging, who'd made himself smaller and smaller, hoping that if he took up less space, they might finally let him stay. That man was gone, not destroyed, transformed, rebuilt with a foundation of self-respect and documentation and the understanding that truth matters more than approval. I'd lost a marriage, lost 7 years, lost the illusion of a family that had never really been mine. But I'd gained something more valuable, myself, the version of me that existed without apology, without compromise, without the constant calculation of whether I was enough for people who decided I wasn't. My phone buzzed, a client asking about timeline for a project. I responded quickly, professionally, then put the phone away and turned back to the ocean. The waves kept coming, each one unique, each one temporary, each one part of something larger and more permanent than any single moment, building and breaking in the endless work of shaping shorelines. I was doing the same thing, building and breaking, clearing away what didn't serve me, constructing something new on foundations that would hold. The sun was setting now, turning the water gold and orange, and finally deep purple. I watched it sink toward the horizon and thought about beginnings, how they often looked like endings, how sometimes you had to tear everything down to see what was worth saving, how sometimes the bravest thing you could do was walk away from people who'd never valued you and build a life where you valued yourself. I stood there until the stars came out, until the beach was empty except for me and the eternal conversation between sea and sand. Then I walked back to my car, drove home to my house, and slept deeply in my bed without dreams of Christmas dinners or broken windows or families that were never mine. And in the morning, I woke to sunlight and silence and the clean, open possibility of a day that was entirely my own. They'd wanted me to be grateful just to sit at their table. Instead, I'd built my own table, my own house, my own life. And I'd done it with the precision of an architect who understood that some structures needed to fall before better ones could rise. The receipts were filed, the evidence documented, the truth told, and I was finally, completely free.